obviously we're having a technical problem. Let me just tell you what, again, the president said in what has been his second statement. His first statement came after the first attacks here in New York. Short time ago, the president said, we have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. He added, we make no mistake, said the president, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible. I think we're going to try and hear the president again. Here we go. Yeah. This is coming to us from the broadcast pool. It's traveling with the president. Obviously, it's a very chaotic day. As you can imagine, a horrible tragedy has taken place. And people are working very hard to get stuff done and get it done right. And obviously the pool is having trouble feeding the tape. But again, the president said, make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. Cowardly acts, I think it's fair to say we don't quite have our arms around the magnitude of it all.
I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President Bush, short time ago, in his second remarks of the day, the president initially was headed back to the White House, and a security decision was made to divert the flight. And so the president will not go back to Washington, at least not yet. When he will return, perhaps John King can tell us. Our senior White House correspondent joins us now. John? John, are you there?
Yes, I am, Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do. I hear you fine. Do you have any word on when the president will come back?
No, we do not. As you reported, we were told earlier in the day the number one priority was the president's safety. The number two priority was to get him back to the White House because they believed that would send a powerful political statement. But as the president was on his way back from Florida, we are told by sources a security decision was made that at this time not to bring him back to Washington. So he was brought, and we won't disclose his exact location for security reasons, he was brought to one of several military installations in the United States that is equipped, we are told, with a very sophisticated command and control bunker, very much like the equipment that would be available to the president here at the White House in the White House Situation Room. We are also told that national security team members are still in the White House Situation Room, and earlier today, at least as of a little more than an hour ago, Vice President Cheney as well, directing operations and monitoring things from there. But the president obviously deciding not to come directly back to Washington. We are told that is for security reasons, delivering the statement you just heard. He has been in touch with congressional leaders, and we are told leadership members of the U.S. Congress are also being taken to an undisclosed location for their security. So we're trying to get more information on that, and we will bring that to you as soon as we have it. Aaron.
John, thanks. Senior White House correspondent John King. Peter Bergen, CNN's Peter Bergen has been tracking the government of Afghanistan for some time, and he was listening in a few moments ago when the Taliban spokesman was speaking. Peter, first of all, what did you hear? Was there anything that perhaps the rest of us might not have heard, any nuance in what you heard? Why don't you start there?
Well, we just heard from the Foreign Minister, Wakil Mutawakil, who's, relatively speaking, a moderate of the Taliban movement. He basically repeated what I think is a standard Taliban line we've heard for the past at least couple of years, which is that Osama bin Laden isn't a terrorist and that he's being contained by the Taliban and that he's not able to conduct political or military missions. This, unfortunately, is really a false statement since Osama bin Laden has been fingered by both Yemeni and U.S. authorities for the bombing of the USS Cole in Yemen in October 2000. There isn't an indictment there yet. The FBI continues to investigate, but senior Yemeni officials and senior U.S. officials have said that he's the primary suspect. So we've seen that bin Laden was able to bomb 2 U.S. embassies in Africa in '98 within 9 minutes of each other. We've seen that bin Laden was able to blow a huge hole in the side of one of the most sophisticated warships in the U.S. Navy, the USS Cole in Yemen in October of last year. And unfortunately, he must be top of the list of the person sophisticated enough in terms of operations to bring off these kinds of terrible disasters we've seen today. If you're looking for who is the most likely suspect, he has to be it. You've got an operation in which several people appear to commit suicide. You've also got an operation in which people obviously had some skill in piloting planes. These are clearly attributes of his organization. We know that he has pilots in his organization. We've seen in several instances that his members of his organization commit suicide in attacks. We've also seen a pattern of warnings in previous bin Laden attacks in which this fits. 9 weeks before the U.S. embassy bombings in Africa in August of '98, bin Laden held a press conference in Afghanistan talking about, quote, good news in coming weeks. A few months before the USS Cole was bombed in Yemen, a videotape circulated around the Middle East in which bin Laden was wearing a Yemeni dagger, which he's never done in previous photographs, and one of his number 2 called for attacks on U.S. targets in Yemen. Just recently, there's been a videotape floating around the Middle East in which bin Laden, a very confident bin Laden, calls for attacks on the United States, says that the victory of Yemen, referring to the USS Cole attack, will continue. People that I've talked to are familiar with the bin Laden organization, said that the threats on this tape were very serious, that there was an imminent attack in the works. I spoke to somebody who was familiar with the organization a few weeks ago who made those statements to me. I had been very concerned about a potential attack as a result of this tape. It fits with the modus operandi, which is to talk about potential attacks coming up relatively soon without being particularly specific.
Peter, let me just interrupt you for a second. Our senior analyst, Jeff Greenfield, is here, and Jeff has a question. Jeff, go ahead.
Hi, Peter. If I'm not mistaken, you actually interviewed Osama bin Laden some years ago, correct?
Yeah, in '97 for
right.
CNN.
Now, at that time, what did he say about the notion of targeting civilians? I mean, what is the rationale behind targeting civilians for death and destruction?
Well, at that time, Jeff, he told us that because of the American military presence in the Middle East, that he was calling for attacks on U.S. soldiers. Now, he said if American civilians got in the way, that was sort of their problem. So at that time in '97, he was really only calling for attacks on American military targets. Later, that position evolved. Like by '98, he was calling for attacks on all Americans, whether civilian or military. I think the rationale behind that thinking is that, in his view, if you're an American taxpayer, you're subsidizing the anti-Islamic, quote, activities that he's against, whether that's in Saudi Arabia, with the American military presence there, or with America's support for Israel in the ongoing intifada. Jeff.
Peter, thank you for your work today. I suspect we'll get back to you, but we appreciate the background, which I think gives us some context for why the focus is again on bin Laden. But we should add that as we talk to you now, we can't be certain. We do not know that that's who is behind what has happened What we do know is an extraordinary national tragedy has taken place, that someone is responsible, that the American government has promised to hunt down and punish, the president's words a short time ago, hunt down and punish whoever is responsible.
Do we have Director Gates still on the phone?
No, I don't believe
I guess we do not. Because the question, obviously, we've already heard it with General Clark and at least one of the congressmen asking the question, how can an agency with an estimated budget of $26.5 billion a year not have known this? I think that's the first of many such questions we're going to be hearing.
Sandy Berger, who worked national security in the Clinton administration, and Richard Holbrooke, the former UN ambassador, back on the phone with us. Mr. Berger, give me a sense of what is going on in Washington right now. Who are the players at the table? Where is the table? And what are they doing?
Well, obviously the President of the United States is at the head of the table no matter where he is. But others around that table include the Secretary of Defense and Attorney General, head of the FBI, the National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, because this may obviously involve international matters. I think we, in the midst of our outrage and indignation, we have to stay focused and stay determined here. The first job in this situation is rescue and to deal with what must be thousands of people here who are in peril. This is, in the first instance, a massive rescue operation. In the second instance, it's a security operation. We don't know what else may be part of this multifaceted operation. A number of precautions have been taken in the last few hours, and we have to obviously lock down as much as we can. And then the focus becomes detection. And I think that given the magnitude of this, given the fact that this has obviously involved multiple points of origin in the United States, it is inconceivable to me that we will not know relatively quickly when the dust settles who is responsible for this.
Now, Mr. Holbrooke, Ambassador Holbrooke, what has happened today is extraordinary. Give it a kind of historical context, the enormity of what's taken place.
Well, I think your coverage has made it more clear than anything else, although despite the superb efforts you've made, it hasn't yet become fully evident to your viewers what would be evident to any of us like myself who worked in the World Trade Center. I was there in the last bombing, as I mentioned earlier. That the number of people in that area, including the Chambers Street subway stop, which goes right under the World Trade Center, means that the dimensions of it exceed by a factor of probably 100 any previous incident, including Oklahoma City and the previous World Trade Center in American history. And one must be ready for news that will be very, very grim indeed for all of us as individuals who will have friends and relatives there, and for all Americans. And there will be additional consequences. This is the financial center of the world. The buildings in that area, all of which have now been evacuated, whose infrastructures may be threatened by gas and electrical line degradation, could affect, at least temporarily, the financial markets as well, although I would leave that to Treasury, and Sandy Berger listed the people at the table. I'm not sure if Sandy mentioned the Treasury Secretary, but I'm sure the Treasury and the Fed are well aware of the implications. We have to go back to the fact that everyone has talked about the possibility of this kind of thing for a long time, and we faced lesser but similar attempts. This exceeded, apparently, the expectations of the intelligence experts, and we will learn more about that in the weeks to come. But I need to underscore one point. To find the people responsible is going to take a unified international effort. No one nation, not even the United States, can do it on its own. And we must have the full cooperation of the Russians, of the states in the Middle East, because I think the assumption that that's the region where this was planned is pretty solid. And I repeat this again, any nation that is seen to have harbored or abetted or sheltered any of these people must be treated as co-equally responsible. They cannot hide behind the facade we just saw in the remarks of the Taliban foreign minister. And Peter Bergen's extraordinarily insightful explanation a few minutes ago on CNN, I think, is the first real glimpse into that the viewers have had into how dangerous this is. If the Taliban shelters Osama bin Laden, as they do, and if Osama bin Laden is responsible for this, as I think almost everyone is going to suspect, then the Taliban must be held equally responsible for what has happened today.
Jeff?
And Ambassador Holbrooke, I would like you to be specific. What does that mean? Are you talking about a retaliatory strike against
Jeff?
Afghanistan?
Yeah, that's Jeff.
It's Jeff Greenfield. I'm sorry,
Hi,
Ambassador.
Jeff. No.
Is that what you mean? That if put the links together?
Jeff. Let me be very frank, and I don't want to lapse into bloody-minded verbal excesses at a moment of high emotion. But let's be very blunt about this. If a country or regime, the Taliban, or some other regime to be determined by the intelligence community, has sheltered people who played a role in this, they cannot hide behind the attributes of they didn't know it, they had nothing to do with it. They must cooperate in the pursuit of the people responsible. And since the Taliban, a leader, has been publicly proclaimed by Osama bin Laden as the present spiritual leader of the Muslim world, I'm referring to bin Laden's declaration that Mullah Muhammad Omar is the rightful leader of the spiritual leader of the Muslim world, something he said on tape, quoted by John Burns in the New York Times 2 days ago. And if, in fact, these people are in some degree of collusion, I personally believe, and I'm only speaking for myself here, I personally believe that the Taliban should be regarded as co-equally responsible for this, and therefore, if and when we consider military action, it is fully justified, and the Taliban should face the same consequences.
Ambassador, thank you. Just quickly, if we can, one last question to Sandy Berger. When you were at the table, in honesty, did you ever anticipate the magnitude, an attack of this magnitude, which has taken place, just to remind people, not just in this city, in New York, not just in the capital, Washington, but on a number of airliners flying across the country as well? Was the planning that broad? Was the fear that great?
Well, I think for some time we have known that we are vulnerable to a serious attack. A multiple attack was thwarted, as you recall, during the Millennium New Year. But I think this, certainly exceeds in scope anything that intelligence community anticipated, and is as I said, an extraordinarily sophisticated operation to carry out something like this from various sites in the United States relatively simultaneously without detection. Whoever has perpetrated this has declared war on the United States, and we will have to respond accordingly. But I would also caution here that we should be careful about jumping to certitude about what happened here. We'll know this soon enough, and we'll also be able to find out why this was not detected.
I think that's just an extraordinarily important point, that what is going on right now at this moment is more important than why it happened. And what is going on is you have thousands of people, we presume, in a number of different places whose lives are at risk, who have been hurt, who need to be rescued, who need to be treated, who need to be taken to hospitals. In New York, in northern New Jersey, where the bulk of the injured are being treated here, there is a critical shortage of blood. Hospital officials are desperately seeking help there. And as Mr. Berger said, time enough later to figure out who and how we deal with it. Ambassador Holbrooke, Sandy Berger, thank you both for joining us. William Rodriguez, I just was looking down. There are literally down below us on by Madison Square Garden, which is where we're located, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people on the corner, and they are just looking out. And from where they are, they can't see very much but the smoke. And I can't tell you if something has happened, but and it's lunch hour here, and there's just a lot of people, as there have been all morning, looking at a street that is almost empty. As New York, the southern part of New York, Penn Station by the Garden, essentially being evacuated to allow emergency crews to get to the scene. William Rodriguez is a maintenance worker at the Trade Center, I believe. In any case, he's on the phone with us now. Mr. Rodriguez, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Tell me where you were when, well, which of the two buildings were you in?
I work on the building one, the one that got hit the first time.
Tell me what happened.
I was on the basement, which is a support floor for the maintenance company, and we hear like a big rumble, not like an impact, like a rumble, like something like moving furniture on a massive way, and all of a sudden we hear another rumble, and a guy comes running into our office, and all his skin was off his body. All his skin, we went crazy, we started screaming, we told him to get out. We took everybody out of the office outside to the loading dock area, and then I went back in, and when I went back in, I saw people, I heard people that were stuck on an elevator, on a freight elevator, because all the elevators went down, and water was going in, and they were probably getting drowned. And we get a couple of pipes and opened the elevator, and we got the people out. I went back up, and I saw one of the officers from the Port Authority Police. I've been working there for 20 years, so I knew him very well. My routine on the World Trade Center is in charge of the staircase. And since there was no elevator service, I have the master key for all the staircase doors. So I went up with the police officer and a group of firemen. As we went up, there was a lot of people coming down, and while we got, it was very difficult to get up.
Mr. Rodriguez, how much time has elapsed here in this, as you recount the events? Did it seem like hours, minutes, seconds?
No, it wasn't hours.
But what did it seem like?
Well, there was a big time, like a gap. There was a gap of time. I won't be able to tell you if it was 15, 20 minutes, but it was a gap of time. We heard while we were on the 33rd floor, on the 27th floor, because we stopped there with the fire department because the equipment was very heavy and they were breathing very hard. They took a break because they couldn't continue going up, so they wanted to take a break.
Yeah.
And we have a person on a wheelchair that we were going to bring down on a gurney, and a lady that was having problem with a heart attack, and some other guy that was breathing hardly, and we went a couple of floors up while they were putting the person in the gurney, got up to the 39th floor, and we heard on the radio that the 65th floor collapsed.
All right,
It collapsed.
Mr. Rodriguez, let me stop you there at the 65th floor. And let me add, you're a lucky man, it seems like today. Thank you for joining us. Matt Cornelius, you were on the 64th floor, 65th floor?
65th floor. Yeah, that's where I work.
Tell me what happened.
Well, I arrived at work a little bit early today.
What do you do?
And I work for the Port Authority in the aviation department. And I was just putting my stuff away, and all of a sudden we heard a loud crash. And the building started shaking, kind of moving like a wave.
What did you think was happening?
I had no idea. I mean, we figured either an airplane had hit it or our first instinct was airplane. And everyone started screaming and said, you know, move away from the windows and let's get out of here. And we saw debris fall past the window on the north side.
How much, just to help our viewers kind of orient themselves, You're on the 65th floor of a building that is how many stories?
I believe it's 110.
So 50 stories above you this has taken place.
I imagine so.
Okay.
We really had no idea. A floor about every 2 minutes.
And how many people are in this group with you?
Well, there was just one other person that I worked with that was with us. It was packed. I mean, it was a virtual traffic jam in the staircase, up and down, I guess. It was very full.
And we're breaking into CNN's extraordinary coverage again for a recap of events so far. We will go back to it. The United States is reeling after an apparently coordinated series of attacks in New York and Washington, where aircraft have been deliberately crashed into major buildings. Just before 11 p.m. Eastern Australian time, a commercial jet slammed into one of New York's World Trade Center towers, setting the building ablaze. 18 minutes later, another commercial airliner, presumably hijacked, flew into the second tower of the Trade Center building, sending flames and smoke from upper floors and showering debris on streets below. About 90 minutes after the first plane struck, the south tower of the World Trade Center collapsed, and less than half an hour later, the North Tower also collapsed. There's still no word on the number of dead or injured, but reports say hospitals have been inundated. Almost simultaneously with the New York attacks, another airliner ploughed into the Pentagon in Washington. And a fourth airliner has apparently crashed in Pennsylvania. United Airlines has confirmed 2 of its planes with a total of 110 people aboard have crashed. The other 2 aircraft are believed to be owned by American Airlines. The Pentagon and the White House and the American Capitol buildings have all been evacuated. Washington and New York have been virtually locked down by security. The attacks have triggered security alerts across the United States and in the rest of the world. President George W. Bush has described the attacks as a national tragedy.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
And the US Secretary of State, Colin Powell, has been unanimously supported at a meeting of the Organisation of American States for his condemnation of the attacks. Speaking in Peru, Mr. Powell said those responsible would never kill the spirit of democracy.
A terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation, but has befallen all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, befallen all those who believe in democracy. Once again, we see terrorism, we see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose. They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way. You can be sure that America will deal with this tragedy in a way that brings those responsible to justice.
And here once again is the hotline number for Australians worried about their friends and family in the United States. The number is 1300 555 135. That number again is 1300 555 135. And Telstra advises that the 1300 number is the best prospect for getting updated information about Australians in the United States. So far, 156 people are confirmed dead, with thousands more injured. We'll return you now to our CNN coverage.
Something that is very hard to describe. But at the same time, I have to say that the fire department, the police department, they were all there. They were so brave, all those men and women, that I feel that thanks to them, many people were saved.
Yes, can I interrupt there for a second? When I was coming down, just as I left the building, there were still firemen inside the building on those floors that I mentioned before, on the 34, 38, 39, and 27th floor. And I'm 100% sure that they didn't make it. And the officer that told me to get out with the group that was taking the person on the gurney was an officer from the Port Authority Police, Officer Lim. I know he didn't make it, because as I came out of the building, I saw a lot of bodies on the floor. I saw a lady encrusted on the floor. That's probably one of the persons that jumped from the building, if he jumped from the building. But it was like he melted on the floor. That's how bad it was. As I came out of the building, we hear the rumbling, and I was told, run. When I look up, everything is coming down. And I start running as far as I could, and we all jumped under one of the fire trucks, right on time, because everything just came right on top of us. We could have been crushed because the truck was coming down on us. And all of a sudden it stopped, and we were pulled out from under the truck. But I know these officers didn't make it.
Mr. Marcos, Mr. Martinez, thank you for your extraordinary descriptions of what was going on in and around the buildings, excuse me, around 9 o'clock this morning, a little before 9, and a little after 9 here in New York. We've heard a number of references today. Certainly the first thing we thought of as we were coming in to the February 93 attack on the World Trade Center. And as horrible as that was, and it was, 6 people died that day. Many hundreds were injured, but 6 people perished. It is not reasonable to believe that the numbers will be anything like that. They will be far, far worse. And I think we're just beginning to get a sense of the magnitude. CNN's Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we're listening to your reporting and the people you've been talking with. I have to say, in stunned silence, none of us ever seen anything close to the magnitude of this horrific events of this morning. Just to quickly recap, 4 commercial airplanes in the United States, 2 United Airlines, 2 American Airlines, have crashed. We know 2 of them went into, and you can see the flights here, American Airlines Flight 11 leaving Boston on the way to Los Angeles. This is one of the planes, American Airlines 77 Dulles to Los Angeles. That plane, that second plane, believed to have crashed into the Pentagon, but again, that's not confirmed. The first American Airlines flight believed to have crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers. United Airlines Flight 93 leaving Newark on the way to San Francisco, believed to have crashed in Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh. And finally, another United Airlines flight believed to have crashed into the World Trade Center. In all, horrific, not just damage, but surely loss of life. It's far too early to know victims, the number of victims, the number of casualties. We do have some information we want to share with you. In addition to what you're seeing in New York City, one of those planes, as we said, crashed into the Pentagon. We're going to be taking you there in a moment to our correspondent, Bob Franken. But we want to let you know what we're learning, what our correspondents are learning, that in the last little while, 5 battleships, some of them destroyers, we know have left Norfolk and have moved out of port in order to be deployed for security reasons along the east coast of the United States. In addition, 2 aircraft carriers that were based in Norfolk, in the Norfolk area, have been moved out to sea and on their way to New York, to the New York area. Now, we don't have much more information than that. We were originally told they were just leaving port for safety reasons, for security reasons. We're now told that very specifically the mission of the aircraft carriers is to move into the New York area. The mission of the battleships to be deployed along the East Coast. And of course, as we get more information, we'll share that with you. As I turn to Bob Franken at the Pentagon, I just want to tell you, President Bush, we can tell you now, has been at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. He's now leaving that site on his way to an undisclosed location. Authorities telling us that they will not tell us where he is headed. Secretary of State Powell, the same story there, on his way back to the United States from a conference in Peru to an undisclosed location, and leaders of the United States Congress, both parties and both houses of Congress, moved to an undisclosed location. Now to our correspondent at the Pentagon, Bob Franken, who is, I believe, at a safe distance there from what's been going on. Bob, please bring us up to date.
Well, we're on the east side of the Pentagon, as you can see, Judy, and you can see over my shoulder that smoke continues to billow, smoke that is sometimes thick, sometimes a little dissipated, but we're talking about 4.5 hours after a plane, it is described as probably being a jumbo jet-sized plane, crashed into the Pentagon about 9:20 this morning. We now want to show you what it looks like on the west side. This is video that was shot by Vito Maggiolo, who is an assignment editor and producer for CNN, who was able to get video. You can see that firefighters there are fighting in an area, rings 4, 5, and 6, on the west side of the Pentagon. Vito says that it was an area, in his estimation, that was about 30 yards wide and about 10 yards deep into the building. The firefighting was hampered, he says, because inside the building, sprinklers, standpipes, other forms of hydrants were damaged. There's an estimate that several hundred firefighters and emergency workers are there at the Pentagon. We're also told, of course, that there have been evacuation efforts throughout the day. We can see those. We do not have an estimate on the number of casualties. I can tell you that from our vantage point, we have seen a constant parade of casualty units, military casualty units, civilian ambulances, fire engines, and the like going to the Pentagon. There, of course, have been casualties, but as I said, we don't have any sort of estimate about that now. Now, we do also have somebody to talk with us who was an eyewitness to the actual crash. He was watching from Arlington, Virginia, which is a suburb over. His name is Tim Timmerman. Mr. Timmerman, are you with us right now?
I sure am.
You're a pilot. Tell us what you saw.
Well, I was looking out the window. I live on the 16th floor overlooking the Pentagon and the corner apartment, so I have quite a panorama. And being next to National Airport, I hear jets all the time, but this jet engine I heard was way too loud. I looked out to the south, to the southwest, and it came right down 395, right over Columbia Pike. And as it went by the Sheraton Hotel, the pilot added power to the engines. I heard it spool up a little more. And then I lost it behind a building, and then it came out, and I saw it hit right in front of, it didn't appear to crash into the building. Most of the energy was dissipated and hitting the ground. But I saw the nose break up, I saw the wings fly forward, and then the conflagration just engulfed everything in flames. It was horrible.
What can you tell us about the plane itself?
It was a Boeing 757, American Airlines, no question.
You say that there was a Boeing, and you say it was a 757 or 767. It's hard.
757.
757,
yeah,
which
American
of course
Airlines.
is American Airlines, one of the new generation of jets, and of course,
it was not. It was so close to me. It was like looking out my window and looking at the helicopter. It was just right there.
We were told that it was. We were told that it was flying so low that it clipped off a couple of light poles on its way in.
That might have happened behind the apartments that occluded my view, and when it reappeared, it was right before impact. And like I said, I saw the airplane disintegrate and then just blow up into a huge ball of flames.
So there was a fireball that you saw.
Absolutely, and the building shook, and it was, quite a tremendous explosion.
What did you see after that?
Nothing but the flames, and I sat here and I took a few pictures out my window, and I noticed the fire trucks, and the response was just wonderful. Fire trucks were there quickly. I saw the area. The building didn't look very damaged initially, but I do see now, looking out my window, there's quite a chunk in it. But I think the blessing here might have been that the airplane hit before it hit the building, hit the ground, and a lot of energy might have gone that way. That's what it appeared like.
Well, there is, of course, we've heard some discussion about the fact that it could have been worse had it actually gone a little bit higher and gone into what's called the ring, the center of the Pentagon, which is a...
Exactly.
This is a 5-sided building.
Right. As you know, the rings are A, B, C, D, E. It has just caught the E ring on the outside, and that's why I felt it didn't look as damaged as it could be. It looked like on the helipad, which is on that side.
Right. Did you see any people being removed, any injured being removed, that type of thing?
No, sir. I'm up at about a quarter of a mile, maybe a little bit closer, and at that point I saw nothing like that.
Tim Timmerman, thank you very much. An eyewitness, Judy, to the crash. We still have no idea about the number of casualties. We know that there is a gaping hole on the west side of the Pentagon. As you can see, the smoke continues to billow. Judy?
All right, Bob Franken, and of course our audience, no surprise, hospitals in the Washington area dealing with casualties from the plane crash at the Pentagon. We were told a few hours ago there's a blood shortage in the Washington area. Hospitals wanting people to know if you are in a position to donate blood, it would very much be needed and appreciated. And I just want to quickly say here before we go to the site of the Pennsylvania crash that the D.C. National Guard was having difficulty getting through to people that it needs to mobilize. And this is information specific to the Washington, D.C. area. The D.C. Guard wants to alert the 372nd Military Police Battalion and its subordinate companies to report as soon as possible to the D.C. Armory. Now, we got this information just about half an hour ago, and there have been so many other stories and pieces of information coming in. We haven't been able to get this out, but we do want to get it out now. Perhaps it will do some good. Joining us now, I mentioned to you a moment ago that we have a correspondent on the scene of the airplane crash into the ground, we believe. I'm going to go to David Mattingly, CNN correspondent there in Pennsylvania. This is near Shanksville, Somerset County in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. David Mattingly, are you with us now?
Yes, Judy, I'm here, and we are outside of the town of Shanksville. And to give you some idea of what kind of countryside this is, to my left is a huge field of corn. To my right is a rolling green pastoral hill here at the edge of the Allegheny Mountains. One of the last places you would probably expect to be touched by the violence of an act of terrible terrorism like we have seen today. But people here in the area have reported that they saw a commercial airliner going overhead at about 2,000 to 3,000 feet with no landing gear down. They heard then a loud roar of an engine, at which point the jet climbed and then banked sharply to the left before going down straight on a 45-degree angle. Now, it hit the ground at that 45-degree angle. People here at the scene say there are no large pieces of debris even left from the plane. No hope of, at this point, it seems to be no hope of survivors. There's just about every piece of emergency personnel here from miles around. The mood is considerably calmer, as you might imagine, than what you might see in Washington or New York, but there is a great deal of concern. Schools are being closed, businesses are being closed up into Pittsburgh and other parts of Pennsylvania. Prayer vigils are being reported, scheduled all across this part of Pennsylvania as far as away as Altoona has been reported. Also, at this point, there has been an emergency staging area set up. We are a good ways away from the crash scene, and we will see what transpires here. Judy?
David Mattingly on the scene, as we're saying there, near Shanksville, a small town in Somerset County, about 80 miles south of Pittsburgh. This the site of one of the two United Airlines aircraft. This a Boeing 757 left Newark, New Jersey this morning on its way to San Francisco. This is the plane that we know crashed. And you just, with David Mattingly's report, looking at the site of where this plane came down, we don't know where, we presume terrorists behind this, what their destination was, what their target was. We can only presume, we can only guess that they were short of the target, that they were headed someplace farther, someplace else from where they landed. With me now here in the studio, Connecticut Democratic Senator Christopher Dodd. Senator Dodd, a longtime member of not only the Senate, but of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Dodd, first of all, what can you say to the American people listening who want to know about the security of the leaders of our country, the president, and everyone else?
Well, I think they've taken the proper steps in here, and you haven't heard as much from some of the leaders as you might like at this point, but I think those responsible for their security are doing exactly what they should be doing. I'm told that they're in very good shape, that they are being isolated because we don't know the magnitude of this effort. It's beyond our imagination already what has occurred, and if someone or organization clearly responsible for this sophisticated an effort, the potential for them doing more damage is obviously obvious. And so making sure that our leaders are secure is the right step. And for those who may be wondering abroad who are watching this program, Judy, I'm a Democrat, as you know. We stand completely and totally behind our president. We may have our differences from here from time to time, but on a day like this, which rivals, if not exceeds, the attack on Pearl Harbor, almost 60 years ago, 3 months from now, we stand totally united behind our president and our government. They're taking the proper steps. We're pulling together as a people, and we will overcome this. Initially, obviously, our prayers and thoughts goes for those who've lost their lives, who've been injured in this incredible attack. And then we will, yes, I'm sorry.
Senator, I'm just going to interrupt you now. We're told President Bush just about to be wheels up from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. And now let's go back to Aaron Brown in New York.
Judy, thank you. Senator, thank you both. I believe we have former Secretary Henry Kissinger on the phone. The Secretary is in Germany today, and he joins us on the phone from there. Mr. Kissinger, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Just quickly, sir, your reactions to what is unfolding in the United States today.
Well, it's obviously a shocking event. It was, I was giving a speech when somebody came in and interrupted the question period to make that announcement, and nobody in the room believed it. They all thought it had to be a mistake. Well, it's obviously, it's an integrated attack and must be dealt with in an integrated way.
Well, when you say an integrated attack and dealt with in an integrated way, tell me what that means, sir.
Well, it is obviously any organization that can plan such a coordinated attack within a very brief period of time must have substantial resources and must have a very capable organization and must have a haven where it is planning these things. You can't do that in a back room.
And when you talk about an integrated response...
Well, the integrated response is obviously, first of all, I want to say,
okay,
like every American right now, I'm behind the president. And this, the response right now has been exactly what is needed. And there's, the first necessity has to be to go through the tragedy, to help the families, and to clean up the immediate situation. Then the next step will have to be a program to attempt to eradicate the source of this and to bring pressure and serious pressure on governments that harbor this kind of organization, and especially governments where we suspect that these organizations are located.
Sir, for a long time, there's been a kind of cat and mouse game, and I don't make light of this in any sense when I say game, between the governments that harbor terrorists and our government, other Western governments. It's all changed today, hasn't it? I mean, the stakes have changed enormously. The response likely will change enormously. It's all different, isn't it?
That's correct. When these terrorists dare to attack the territory of the United States, it then becomes a question of the functioning of our society. And we have to protect ourselves, and I'm sure we will. And I think it must now, it's not an isolated attack. It's not just an attack on an embassy, which is bad enough. and it can't be dealt with one retaliatory blow.
It cannot be dealt with one retaliatory blow?
No, there has to be a systemic attack. I don't know what that means.
I understand.
And I'm not sitting here with a great plan. I'm saying this is what I would think our government will want to work towards.
And would you expect that we, the United States government, will find enormous international support for whatever actions the United States government chooses to take, or will there be those important governments that resist here?
Well, first thing is we have to protect ourselves. We would, of course, like to get as much support as we can. And we will be able to judge our friends by the degree of support that we get. But there'll be some governments who say we have to understand the conditions that produce this. There will come a time to deal with its circumstances, but the immediate thing is these organizations have to be put on the run. If they have to spend all their time trying to survive, they have less time for terrorism.
And, Mr. Secretary, we heard, and I'm not sure you were able to, but a few moments ago, Chris Dodd, Senator Dodd of Connecticut, compared this to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Can you give me any historical context for what has taken place today, or are we a bit too close to it all to understand it yet?
Well, the attack on Pearl Harbor was, I guess, the first attack, was certainly the first attack from across the seas on the territory of the United States, but it was not yet the mainland. And I agree with Senator Dodd. This is comparable to an attack on Pearl Harbor, and it must have the same response, and the people who did it must have the same end as the people who attacked Pearl Harbor. But it isn't just the people who did it, it's the people who make it possible.
These are the governments that harbor those who carry out these attacks.
That harbor or encourage them with their propaganda.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who joins us from Germany, where he was attending a conference. When he heard the news, he said it was silent, unbelievable. People simply could not believe what they were hearing. I think that's a term, a phrase you will hear a lot over the days and weeks to come. What has happened here in New York and in Washington and in other parts of the country, unbelievable. A national tragedy. Judy?
Aaron, it's true. No one is able to grasp the enormity of what we're looking at and what we're dealing with here. Let's go now to the Pentagon, where Rear Admiral Quigley is briefing reporters. I believe we have that picture right now.
Your broadcast to phone their families and loved ones immediately to let them know they're okay. And if they are among the injured or the casualties from this, then we will work our way through to identifying them and getting their names out to their loved ones. We will find a way.
Where are the injured going? Where are the injured being taken to?
A variety of area hospitals.
How big was the penetration of the plane itself, Admiral? How many rings of the building?
I don't know.
How wide would you say that gash is? 100 feet, the one we're looking at?
I haven't been over there to see it up close. I don't know.
The number for Navy.
I think that's all for now, ladies and gentlemen. We'll try to be back out and give you some more information as we can.
Marine Corps only, if you wanted to do that. That's Rear Admiral.
Admiral, how many people are working?
We've been talking, you've been listening to Rear Admiral Quigley, one of the folks who works with reporters in the Public Information Office there at the Pentagon. We basically were just listening to the first few minutes of that briefing, getting the word out to people who have friends, family members who work at the Pentagon, telling them if you have people who may be among the injured, we're going to try to find a way to get you that information to get the word out about which hospital they might be in. Of course, we are dealing with tragedies in untold numbers of families across the eastern, primarily the east coast of the United States, but no doubt these people who work at the Pentagon are from everywhere. People who were on these airplanes are from commercial jets from everywhere in the United States. Aaron, back to you.
It is the enormity that's a little bit hard to get our arms around right now. Still, some considerable number of hours since the first attack on the World Trade Center here in New York. And I want to show some pictures of the scene from the ground, but first let me just, a piece of information. United Airlines has now canceled all flights, grounded all flights until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. This is the scene that started to play out. This would be a little after 9 when the first of the trade centers collapsed after they were hit. People gathering, watching. You can see this, the denseness of the smoke. People leaving in a very orderly, calm way have been the reports all morning and afternoon long. One witness who was in the building talked about coming down the stairwell and that people were very quiet. There was no screaming, no crying. People shielding themselves against the smoke. We know that a number of New York City police and fire department personnel have been injured, perhaps some fatally, when the buildings collapsed. We know that hospitals here in New York are in desperate need of blood. We know that the National Guard will be coming into the city to help in support of the 40,000 members of the New York City Police Department. We know that subway service in Manhattan has been shut down. People evacuating streams of people through the streets. There are 50,000 people who go to work just in the Trade Center buildings, the two towers. How many of them were there at the time, we do not know. Thousands, tens of thousands more pass through, getting on and off trains, going to the retail shops and restaurants. Every one of those lives changed today, as perhaps in some way all of our lives have been changed today. It all began at 8:45 this morning. And behind us now, the smoke continues to pour out of the area where the Trade Center towers were. They are no more. They collapsed in the hour after the attack, but the smoke continues to pour through that area behind us, about 30 blocks away, in one of those scenes that none of us will ever forget. CNN correspondent Richard Roth has been on the streets here in Lower Manhattan. Richard?
Yes, Aaron, not chaos here. It's almost eerily silent of the march of thousands of New Yorkers evacuating southern Manhattan, looking to go to New Jersey to get off this island. Dazed, stunned, people concerned about loved ones, cell phones not working. New Yorkers are used to coping with a lot of things here. There have been some bombings and hurricanes and calamities, but really nothing like this before. And of course, behind me are the clouds of where the World Trade Center stood, two towers built in 1970. A short time ago, a Port Authority police official, the Port Authority is the state unit that runs, in effect, the World Trade Center, those buildings that formerly existed, and one of the police officials there, William Hall, said there is no search going on right now. He said until the fires go out, until it is safe for his people and other rescue workers to go in, they are not moving in there. He said on an average day, the two World Trade Center towers get 10,000 people each with 5,000 visitors. A New York City police official told us a short time ago that another triage center is going to be set up here on the west side of Manhattan, 33rd Street area in the Jacob Javits Convention Center. This to handle additional overflow from New York City hospitals, which New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani says have been doing their best in coping with it, but there have been calls for blood. People here walking by me, someone will point to someone and say, this person was in the World Trade Center, just got out. You can hear behind me, there is the roar of military aircraft, the only aircraft you see in the sky. And usually, as New Yorkers will tell you, you can look up at any time and see a plane. They are up in the sky, concerned look from people who gaze upward, shield their eyes to see just what's going on, and an occasional police helicopter. But here in New York City, there is no search going on. William Hall of the Port Authority said we're going to have to wait until we get things all accounted for before we can go in there. Aaron.
Richard, thank you. Richard Roth in Lower Manhattan. Again, just a quick recap for those of you who may just be getting home and hearing these events for the first time. 8:48 this morning, one of those moments that everyone will remember. The first plane, American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, hijacked, crashed into the First Trade Center tower. At 9:04, the second plane, the United Airlines flight, United 175, Boston to Los Angeles, hit the second tower. About a half hour later, 9:38 Eastern Time, American Airlines Flight 77, Washington Dulles Airport to Los Angeles, crashed into the Pentagon, hitting just short of the Pentagon itself, and perhaps that was most fortunate. And at 10:20 a.m. Eastern Time, United Flight 93, Newark to San Francisco, crashed about 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. Those are the times and the events. They don't begin to describe what has happened. What has happened is not simply a series of moments, but something much larger. Phil Zappetta is with the American Red Cross, and he is on the phone with us. Mr. Zappetta, this is Aaron Brown. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can, Aaron.
Tell me what sort of strain is on the Red Cross's resources right now?
Well, the American Red Cross responded immediately to all areas of this disaster. Right now, our focus is really on disaster relief, providing blood assistance, and any disaster mental health assistance that we can provide around the country to both the survivors and the families who've been involved in this tragedy.
Phil, tell me what that means exactly. I understand the need for blood. Are you setting up shelters for people?
Sure. We have shelters both in New York City and in Washington, D.C. that are set up to help people. There we have disaster mental health counselors that are able to meet with people and to register people as they come in and are trying to get away from the situation. We are set up in New York at Penn Station, at Grand Central Station, and in Washington, D.C. at Fort Belvedere. It is still chaos right now. We are in the process of ramping up our operations. While we did respond immediately, there's so much work to be done, and we're in the process of doing that right now. We have about 50,000 units of blood that are available for the affected areas, and the American Red Cross is looking at mobilizing that right now and putting that into place.
And Phil, as you were speaking, we were able to put up on the screen numbers that people can call if they can help. If you're sitting in Omaha, Nebraska today, is it helpful in this situation to be going to the blood bank and giving blood, or is it too far away to be meaningful?
The message that the American Red Cross is putting out right now is to donate blood. Call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE, GIVELIFE, or visit redcross.org for more information. But giving blood is where our emphasis is right now.
No matter where you are in the country.
Yes, well, no matter where you are in the country, or you can, contact your local hospital if you're not in a Red Cross area. But 1-800-GIVE-LIFE is the best number to call. Okay, so even if you are far away from the events of today, you can still be helpful, as there is certainly in New York and in Washington, from what Judy said, a serious shortage of blood. The American Red Cross can be helpful. Your local hospital, your local blood bank can be helpful. We suspect before the day is out, fire stations around the country will be involved in these efforts as well. Phil, thank you. Is there anything else, by the way, before I let you go, that you want to say
that would be helpful to our viewers or helpful to the Red Cross?
Well, the Red Cross right now and our president, Dr. Bernadine Healy, extend our heartfelt sorrows to all families and everyone that's been affected by this. We just urge people to donate blood.
Thank you very much, Phil, with the American Red Cross. Phil Zappetta with the American Red Cross. CNN's Miles O'Brien has been tracking the flight paths of these 4 planes that were involved. Miles, are you able to hear me in Atlanta?
Yes, I am, Aaron.
And tell me what you've been able to figure out to this point.
Well, as you probably know, Aaron, there are various commercial websites that allow you to track commercial aircraft. Now, if you go to many of them right now, you're not going to get very far because they're being overwhelmed by interest in people. But even if you could get some of the data, we have just learned from the Federal Aviation Administration that every domestic airliner that was in the air is now on the ground. This is unprecedented in aviation history in this country. There's not a plane flying right now. At any given moment, typically there are 4,000 aircraft. Now, let's take a look at what happened on American Airlines Flight 11. Began in Boston, and it took off on time, 81 people aboard, 9 crew members, 9 flight attendants and 2 pilots. And let's sort of track what happened with this flight. As it went across Massachusetts and went down into the Albany area, actually up in the Adirondacks, it took a sharp dogleg. What's interesting about this flight is everything seemed to be normal. Flight at the altitude was about 29,000 feet, gaining speed at about 450 knots. It took that sharp dogleg down across the Adirondacks straight for New York. Now, what will be interesting about this as this story unfolds will be, number one, listening to any air traffic control conversations to get a sense of what, if anything, air traffic controllers were saying to this aircraft. Undoubtedly, this was spotted on the radar screens, of course. They had quite a bit of time to watch this plane as it went down toward New York. That's probably at least a 30-minute run there. And during the course of that time, those air traffic controllers in those radar installations, New York Center, as it is called, would have been trying to contact American Airlines Flight 11 to indicate its intentions. It must have been a horrifying scene for them. They were probably trying to clear air traffic out of the area. Clearly, once those tapes become available, we'll have a little bit more knowledge. And if it is possible to locate any of the so-called black boxes, the flight data recorders, cockpit voice recorder out of this particular aircraft, they'll obviously know more about what was going on what must have been a very dramatic flight indeed. Now, this is the first flight. This is the flight that first impacted the first tower of the World Trade Center, and this is the first of 4 that we know about, of course, 4 air hijackings, which led to crashes and obviously a tremendous amount of damage. I'm getting this information from a company called FlightExplorer.com. They are compiling their archival radar information from this morning, and as it becomes available, we'll be able to show you the flight paths of the other 3 aircraft that are suspected in all of this, and we'll bring those to you as soon as we get that. Aaron?
Just a quick practical question. These tapes of the cockpit tower communications, do they exist on the ground?
Yes.
Are they recorded in control towers? And then there's a different set of tapes that exist on the plane.
Exactly. It's important to bring out, there are 2 types of tapes in these incidents. The tapes on the ground are the ones that record the radio transmissions between the ground and the aircraft. And clearly the flight controllers would have been calling this aircraft numerous times, and this would have been the case for the 3 others if they deviated from their courses, trying to get some indication as to what was wrong, why the pilot was changing course so dramatically. Now, what will be interesting to hear is if there is some sort of response from these aircraft. This will give us some clue as to who might have been in control of the plane at the time, or if there might have been some sort of struggle aboard, or if there was just a lack of a struggle. There's a lot of mystery here, obviously. Now, ultimately, as they go through the wreckage in these cases, it's possible that investigators, and there's a good chance because they have emergency locating devices on them, they'll find these so-called black boxes, and on those black boxes there might be much more information which might give authorities some clues as to who might be responsible.
Several different kinds of information. There's technical information in these black boxes, what the airplane was doing in a sense, but there's also communications between the cabin crew that exist on those tapes, what pilot was saying to co-pilot. We might be able to hear, if these tapes are ever located, what the people who took control of these planes, and that's clearly what happened, seems clear that that's what happened, what they were saying. Whether these tapes will ever be found, obviously we don't yet know, but that is part of what will happen in the next days. on this day what is happening in both Washington and New York and in a field outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is a massive, massive rescue operation, a massive triage operation. Thousands of people, presumably, have been hurt. Many people, we suspect, have died, though many hours now since that first plane hit the Trade Center at 8:48 Eastern Time. We have yet to hear from any official in the city, any estimate here in New York of the number of people who have been hurt. We just know that hospitals are inundated, that hospitals are running very low on blood, and they need help here. We know that the National Guard will be coming in here to New York to help in support of the New York Police Department. We would add here that a number of members, and we don't know how many, but after the police and fire responded to these two planes hitting the Trade Center, many police officers, many firefighters, many EMS personnel were in the area when the buildings collapsed. How many of them were hurt, we do not know, but we've been told now by two officials or former officials with the city that any number of people, police and fire officials, have been hurt as well. Judy in Washington, Judy Woodruff. Judy.
And Aaron, just picking up on your conversation with Miles O'Brien a moment ago, and perhaps you all referred to this, and I apologize if I'm repeating, the Associated Press reporting on a passenger that was on United Flight 93. Now, this is the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. About 20 minutes before that plane crashed, a passenger with a cell phone locked in a bathroom actually called an emergency dispatcher and shouted into the cell phone, "We are being hijacked, we're being hijacked." They apparently stayed on the phone with this passenger up until the moment when the passenger heard some sort of a loud noise, and then they lost contact. That's just one more piece of the stories, the many, many, many stories that we are pulling together as we watch these developments in Pennsylvania, here in Washington, and of course in New York City. And you just heard Aaron talking about incomplete information about casualties, what hospitals are dealing with. Now, these numbers I'm going to read you right now are only incomplete. We are just beginning to get this kind of information. We're told at Washington area hospitals right now, 53 injured, at least 3 more casualties on the way, although we have to believe that with the commercial jetliner that crashed at the Pentagon, or just in front of the Pentagon, and that was the Boeing 757, and these are the pictures of the Pentagon just outside the Pentagon, 58 passengers on board, 4 crew members and 2 pilots. It is impossible to believe that they did not all perish, and we don't know about others who work at the Pentagon who were in the part of that building that was most affected when that commercial plane went down. We've been talking with a number of people involved in rescue, and right now we want to go to the president's statement. This took place just about an hour and 15 minutes ago. The president was on his way back to Washington from Florida. His plane touched down at an Air Force base in Louisiana, Barksdale Air Force Base near Shreveport. We can now report that information because he's since left Barksdale. But here is what President George W. Bush had to say in this statement.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President Bush made that statement just about an hour and 20 minutes ago at Barksdale Air Force Base near Shreveport, Louisiana. That was an unplanned stop that the president made at that place in order to talk with reporters, meet with others. Since then, Air Force One has taken off, President Bush being flown to an undisclosed location. We're told also that Secretary of State Colin Powell, who had been on his way back to the United States from Peru, being taken to an undisclosed location. Outside the Pentagon, CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre. And Jamie, you got very close to where that plane went down.
That's right, Judy. A while ago, I walked right up to next to the building. Firefighters were still trying to put out the blaze. The fire, by the way, is still burning in some parts of the Pentagon. And I took a look at the huge gaping hole that's in this side of the Pentagon, in an area of the Pentagon that has been recently renovated, part of a multi-billion-dollar renovation program here at the Pentagon. I could see parts of the airplane that crashed into the building, very small pieces of the plane on the heliport outside the building. The biggest piece I saw was about 3 feet long. It was silver and had been painted green and red, but I could not see any identifying markings on the plane. I also saw a large piece of shattered glass. It appeared to be a cockpit windshield or other window from the plane. When this plane hit the Pentagon this morning, according to the Pentagon spokesman Craig Quigley, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld incredibly is described as having run out of his office and down to actually help some of the victims onto stretchers until he was ushered into the National Military Command Center, the secure nerve center or war room deep inside the Pentagon, where he remains at this time. Pentagon officials say he'll stay there for the time being. That is a place where all of U.S. intelligence comes in, and he has complete command with his commanders around the world. At the same time, the Pentagon has dispatched several warships out of port in Norfolk, including the carriers USS George Washington and USS Kennedy. The ostensible reason for that, the movement of those ships and their escort ships, is to move them from more vulnerable positions. But the Navy says they'll also head some of the aircraft carriers up toward New York with the idea that they may be able to render some kind of assistance there, given the magnitude of the tragedy there. Back here, the fight goes on to put out the fire inside the Pentagon. The heat from that blaze was described as absolutely intense, and the number of casualties here has still not been released. Dozens of people were taken away in ambulances, and the Pentagon is still not releasing any figures on deaths. But clearly, people who had offices in that what is now a huge gaping hole in the side of the Pentagon, clearly there were some people killed in this tragedy. Judy?
Jamie, Aaron was talking earlier, one of our correspondents was talking earlier, I think it was Bob Franken, with an eyewitness who said it appeared that Boeing 757, the American Airlines jet, landed short of the Pentagon. Can you give us any better idea of how much of the plane actually impacted the building?
You know, it might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon and then caused the side to collapse. Now, even though if you look at the pictures of the Pentagon, you see that the floors have all collapsed, that didn't happen immediately. It wasn't until almost about 45 minutes later that the structure was weakened enough that all of the floors collapsed.
And Jamie, this happened, we're now able to reconstruct about 9:38 this morning. At that time, Jamie, what are we talking about? Dozens, hundreds of people at work in the building?
There are 24,000 people who work in this building, and most of them are at work at that hour of the morning. They were all evacuated from the building. In my office, which is sort of halfway between where this took place and the other side of the building, which is where the Defense Secretary's office is, eventually even the corridor I was in began to fill up with smoke just as I began to leave the building. But this was the prime time for an attack. However, it's not the prime location. Every time we've thought about what might happen if the Pentagon were subject of attack, we always assumed that the attack would come on the other side, the river entrance where the brass are. But this attack came on the side facing Arlington Cemetery.
Tony Jones in the ABC's National Newsroom, breaking once again, though briefly, into the CNN coverage for an update of events in the United States. The streets of Manhattan are virtually deserted in the wake of the deadly attack on the World Trade Center towers in New York. The death toll from the attacks is expected to run into the hundreds. Already 156 have been confirmed dead in the two hijacked airliners which crashed into the World Trade Center buildings. But that toll will certainly grow as numbers are confirmed in two other airliners, one which crashed into the Pentagon and another which went down outside Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. In New York, the subway system is closed. Buses have been commandeered by police. Security shutters have been pulled over shops, and handwritten signs on banks are urging people to donate blood. In Washington, the mayor has declared a state of emergency. Across the world, American authorities are taking all necessary security precautions. Israel is also beefing up its security with the Air Force on high alert. Staff have been evacuated from diplomatic missions and Jewish institutions around the world. Well, world condemnation has also been swift in coming, as have offers of help, and an Israeli rescue team is preparing to head to the United States. Alarmed by the brutality of the attack, NATO Secretary-General George Robertson has called for the evacuation of all staff from NATO headquarters in Brussels. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the attacks, but the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat has condemned the acts of terrorism and expressed his condolences.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
And the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan has this morning condemned the attacks, calling them deliberate acts of terrorism.
We are all traumatized by this terrible tragedy. We do not yet know how many people have been killed or injured, but inevitably the number will be high. Our first thoughts and prayers must be for them and for their families. I wish to express my profound condolences to them and to the people and government of the United States. There can be no doubt that these attacks are deliberate acts of terrorism, carefully planned and coordinated, and as such, I condemn them utterly. Terrorism must be fought resolutely wherever it appears. In such moments, cool and reasoned judgment are more essential than ever. We do not know yet who is behind these acts or what objective they hope to achieve. What we do know is that no just cause can be advanced by terror.
The Prime Minister, Mr Howard, has been moved from his Washington hotel to the Australian Embassy. 2 Australian defence officers based at the Pentagon have been found and are safe. More than 10,000 Australians live and work in New York City, and Mr Howard has said, we should expect some Australian casualties. He said authorities had stepped up security at American and Israeli embassies and consulates in Australia. The Australian Federal Police have set up an exclusion zone around the US Embassy in Canberra. And here once again is the hotline number for people worried about their friends and family in the United States. The number is 1300 555 135. That number again is 1300 555 135. And Telstra advises that the 1300 number is the best prospect for getting updated information about Australians in the United States. Those are the latest developments, and we'll return you now to the CNN coverage.
Been able to meet with him over the last few years are always held at a location and taken blindfold to another location where they can interview him. So people generally, when they meet him, they don't know exactly where they are. They wait there, he arrives, he departs, then they're free to leave. He lives by extreme secrecy here.
All right, CNN's Nick Robertson joining us, as you could see, from Kabul, Afghanistan, the country run by the religious group, the Taliban, the group that has been suspected, believed for some time of harboring Osama bin Laden. Thank you very much, Nick. And again, we apologize for the delay in the audio there. It is because Nick is on this video phone, which is a new device that we're using, and there is always a delay. Tends to be a delay in audio. I want to bring in now our national security correspondent, David Ensor. You're looking at pictures as I do this from New York City in the moments following the worst of today's attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City, Lower Manhattan, where you can see people running in sheer terror away from either one of the two airplane crashes into the top of the World Trade Center, both towers of which collapsed later on, to the utter horror of people watching both live and on television across the United States and around the world, for that matter. New York City, the subject of the worst terrorism ever to strike the United States. So while we certainly mourn the loss here in Washington at the Pentagon, the airplane that crashed into the Pentagon, the other airplane that crashed near Pittsburgh, both of them commercial airliners with civilians on board, the loss of life in New York City is utterly unbelievable. And just picking up, as we look at these pictures, picking up on what Nick Robertson was saying from Afghanistan, even as the leaders of the Taliban deny any role in this, an Arab journalist based in London is quoted today to the Associated Press as saying that followers of Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago they were going to carry out this sort of an attack. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani joining us once again. Mayor Giuliani.
The tragedy that we're all undergoing right now is something that we've had nightmares about, but probably thought wouldn't happen. My heart goes out to all of the innocent victims of this horrible and vicious acts of terrorism. And our focus now has to be on saving as many lives as possible. We have hundreds of police officers and firefighters who are engaging in rescue efforts in Lower Manhattan. I want to thank Governor Pataki for the incredible cooperation and coordination, and including deploying the National Guard that will be available to relieve our police officers and firefighters and emergency workers in the next couple of hours. The governor and I just spoke to the President of the United States. The coordination with the federal government from the time of the first attack has been excellent, including closing off the airspace around Manhattan and doing everything that can possibly be done in the face of this barbaric act to make the city secure. And we will strive now very hard to save as many people as possible and to send a message that the city of New York and the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists, that our democracy, that our rule of law, that our strength and our willingness to defend ourselves will ultimately prevail. And I'd ask the people of New York City to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened, to go about their lives as normal. Everything is safe right now in the city, and the people who are doing the relief effort need all the help they can get. And then, Governor, thank you very, very much for your assistance and your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership through this crisis. This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed. The first step has to be to make sure we do everything in our power to protect the people and to save the lives of those whose lives are still at risk and to help those who have been injured. And I want to commend the mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the federal government have all offered and made ready support to help us deal with this ongoing crisis. The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now, we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the president, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, well, this is a horrible attack and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude. We will get through this, and we will continue to have a great and free country, state, and society.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible.
There are large numbers.
And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
There are a large number of firefighters and police officers who are in harm's way. And we don't know how many we've lost. But there's no doubt we've lost some firefighters and police officers.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the two buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion after that.
That 8 planes have been hijacked, 4 have only been accounted for. What about the remaining 4? And is there any possibility that there could be bombs on the ground planted by...
We have no specific information to that effect. Obviously, the city is now closed. The airspace around the city is closed. And we are on heightened alert. But we have no specific information suggesting any further attack.
Can you tell us where the planes came from?
I think to give the people of New York confidence, to show that the federal government is standing with us, and to just to make certain that nothing further happens. This has been a very, very difficult and traumatic day for people of the United States and the people of the city. And I think that it's an act that shows that the federal government is going to do everything they can to support us and help us.
Can you give an idea of the extent of the rescue effort that's going on right now in Lower Manhattan? The scope of this thing, of this operation?
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
Are you finding survivors?
Yes, we have some numbers that we can give you. We have 1,500 people at Liberty State Park who were evacuated, described as walking wounded. They were evacuated by ferry and other means. There are about 600, as of about 15 minutes ago, in local hospitals that we account for, 600 people that are being treated in local hospitals. And there are 150 in particular that were critical, that were moved by EMS. New York City has 170 hospitals. So we have a lot of hospitals, and we're utilizing all of them. Probably the one that was the hardest hit was St. Vincent's Hospital. And I would like to just single them out and commend them, because as I was rushing down there, after the first plane hit, before the second, they were already deploying people on the street. I could see the doctors and nurses outside getting ready to receive people. And that was before the second plane actually hit the World Trade Center.
What was your experience down there?
I also blood donations. We have several sites for blood donations. 153 East 53rd Street, 66 in Amsterdam, which is the Red Cross, and 310 East 67th Street. If people want to do something and they can donate blood, that's going to help not just today, but tomorrow and the next day. This relief effort is going to take some time.
Mr. Mayor, you were one of the first people down there. Can you describe the scene in your own words, what you saw down there?
I don't know that I'm really able to describe it. It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building. And then we went into Barclay Street, 75 Barclay Street, I think it was, and we were there when the building collapsed. And it collapsed in part on 75 Barclay Street. So we were trapped in the building for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, trying to get out different exits. And we finally went through a basement and came out 100 Park Place.
Did you ever fear for your own safety, sir?
Sure, yeah.
What went through your mind?
I don't think anything went through my mind other than making sure that we all remained calm and found an exit and just tried to figure out the most intelligent thing to do. Probably the same thing that went through the minds of 10,000 other New Yorkers who I could see on the streets, and I really have to commend them. If you really want to know what New Yorkers are all about, you just watch the way in which they handled themselves. They didn't panic. They moved deliberately. They moved swiftly. But they didn't hurt each other. They helped each other. And these are just the most wonderful people in the world.
Do we know anything about the composition of that dust that blankets lower Manhattan? Is there any asbestos or any hazardous material in that dust?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Mayor, I got reports of a gas explosion related to this as well. Are you aware of that? There was a gas leak or possible...
We don't believe it. We don't believe that's the case.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us anything about where the planes come from, where the aircraft came from?
Bill Diamond reminds me that we've turned off the gas in the city buildings, just to be certain.
Can you tell us
as a precaution
where these aircraft came from? There was a report that may have been hijacked in Boston.
I think we should leave that up to the federal government to yes, we do have some information, but I think we should leave that up to the federal government to release that information. Our focus is on the relief efforts.
Governor, what about security for the rest of the city? Do you think there should be any retaliation on the part of the United States for what happened here in this country, both in New York, Washington, and other places?
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. The second thing is to make sure at the same time we're providing the maximum security against possible additional incidents. But clearly, this is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
Mayor, this is compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war? This has been compared.
I'll do both.
This has been compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war?
This is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example of the people who are responsible for this.
Is it an act of war in your mind?
I don't know that I want to use those words. I think the president is the one that has to respond, and I think what he has to know is that all of us in New York support him, and support him completely in the efforts that he's going to have to make over the next couple of days, week, and to make a point that people can't do this. You can't attack innocent men, women, and children. And ultimately, I'm totally confident that American democracy and the American rule of law will prevail. And the people of New York are going to help to demonstrate that over the next couple of days.
Anybody take responsibility for this? Any group take responsibility at this time? And what is the city doing to safeguard the citizens now that something like this happens?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone that's taken responsibility for it at this time. And secondly, the New York City Police Department is fully deployed, not just in the rescue effort, but all throughout the city of New York, offering as much protection and as much security as we're capable of for the citizens of the city. And at this point, I believe that the people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all of the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us from being a free country and a place that functions. And we'll do everything we can to make that point.
Jennifer Steinhauer, please. Just a house. Can you please tell us what's going to happen to the New York primary?
This morning, I issued an order suspending the primary across the state. There will be no primary today, and we'll reschedule it once we get through this.
Jennifer,
Can you please walk us through the municipal services right now? What's going on with the subway and the schools, forest?
The subway, the schools, the chancellor, I commend the chancellor. He was on the phone a number of times with us. He coordinated very, very carefully what would happen. He thought it out, and he came up with a very good plan, which was essentially to keep the schools open, to keep the children in school, so we didn't have a large number of children in the different boroughs that would be released from school. They're being released. I shouldn't say as normal, but basically on the normal schedule. If parents aren't there to pick up the young children, then the children will be taken to a center, and the parents will be notified to come and pick them up. The children who have Metro cards, who normally travel on the subway, will be able to do that. The subways are functioning in 4 of the 5 boroughs, and can we get an update, Joe, on how the subway is doing in Manhattan?
All the lettered lines are working.
And in Manhattan?
In Manhattan lines, all the lettered lines.
All the lettered lines are working, including in Manhattan. And throughout the rest of the city, public transportation is normal. So the children should be able to return from school in the normal fashion. And if any children don't have parents to pick them up, then we'll hold them, let the parents know, and then the parents can come and pick them up.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned you were on Barclay Street. What's the radius of damage that's been affected? How many other side streets around the world?
I don't think we know yet. The whole area of Lower Manhattan has been very much affected by it.
How many
police and fire are involved? Like how many all NYPD off-duty officers as they come in, or like
all NYPD and FDNY officers are on duty now, and we're going to need all of them. And again, thanks to the governor and the way in which the state reacted, we will have 1,600 National Guard to relieve them over a period of time, so we can get some relief for them.
If anybody's looking for someone that may have been in the World Trade Center or in and around that area, what should they do? How can they get it?
We're going to give you numbers so that we can try to help coordinate that. Individual businesses have already done that, but we will as soon as we can find some time from the relief efforts, give you a number in which people can call, and then we can direct them to the right place.
The National Guard loading or anything like that? Any lawlessness?
There have been no reports of lawlessness, no reports of looting. As I said, we saw a lot of people that were part of the escape effort, and they seem to be conducting themselves in a very, very sensible way, a very deliberate way. They seem to be helping each other. So I don't think we have any reports like that at all.
So the only National Guard we'll see will be in Lower Manhattan, in the bomb site area. They won't be patrolling the rest of Manhattan.
No, the purpose of it is to help with the relief effort. We're gonna need the help of the state, surrounding areas with heavy-duty equipment.
When will they be arriving?
The National Guard troops, some have arrived already, and we expect to have up to close to 2,000 between the National Guard and the state police by later this evening.
Mayor, bridges and tunnels will have to stay closed.
I think everything is closed for now, and then maybe in about an hour or two we can give you an update on what the plan will be for tomorrow.
We saw a lot of lightly injured people walking out of the area because obviously the emergency services were needed for the very seriously injured. People come with us. Some people had difficulty breathing. Is there any health advice to give to people who were caught in this thing, who are not necessarily at risk of losing their life, but
I think well, obviously if you feel ill or you feel that you've been affected by it, you should go to a hospital and get checked out. But if it's just discomfort that you feel, then you can do basically what we did, was to wash our faces off and get rid of the clothes and get to an area where you can breathe in fresh air.
How many people were in the World Trade Center at the time of this attack?
I mean, it was business had already started. It was right before 9 o'clock. I don't know.
Tens of thousands?
Yes. Approximately. Someone just gave me a number of approximately 10,000, but that's a guess.
How long will the city remain on a heightened state of alert?
Until we're told not to. I mean, until the FBI and the police department and the federal government tells us that we shouldn't. Right now, the city should be on a state of alert. Now, instead of frightening people, that should make people feel more confident that everything is being done to keep things secure. And again, let me emphasize that the reason for the National Guard, because I heard the question before, is to help with the relief effort, not because there's any fear of any other problems in the city right now.
How is the
Mr.
Port
Mayor, can
Authority
you tell us about
protecting
the
buildings,
other
Mr.
public
Mayor?
areas, City Hall, One Police Plaza? When will she say for you to return?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. Hopefully soon, but I don't know the answer to that.
And we heard reports that One Police Plaza was evacuated. Was that true?
No, the command center is open.
And it was never.
We have people in the command center right now.
Mr. Mayor, there have also been reports of large loss of life among the police and firemen who were sent there to rescue people. How accurate are those reports?
There is no question that we lost police officers and firefighters, and some that I know personally, and all of us here know personally, that we're very worried about. And we're not going to know the answer to that until much later. And maybe we should just close now and give you a briefing later. And I would just ask everyone, I talked to Cardinal Egan before, because he's at St. Vincent's Hospital. Everybody should, in their own way, say a prayer and ask God for help and for assistance, and also ask God to give us the strength to overcome this, because I know we're going to need strength to overcome it. And I want the people of New York to be an example to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that terrorism can't stop us. American democracy is much stronger than vicious, cowardly terrorists, and we're going to overcome this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani and New York Governor George Pataki talking to reporters. The mayor urged New Yorkers to be calm and said they had been, and indeed in every picture we have seen of the area around the Trade Center, people were evacuating in a very calm, deliberate, no panic that we have been able to see from from the pictures we have taken and the reporting we have done. The mayor said 1,500 walking wounded, as he described it, taken to Liberty State Park, 600 people in local hospitals, at least 150 people in critical condition. But in fact, the mayor said he would not even venture a guess at what these numbers will become as this day continues to unfold, and tomorrow he acknowledged it'll be several days before we really know how many people have been hurt, how many people have died. We would add one other point here I don't believe we have mentioned. As you know, airports around the country have been shut down. Every airport around the country has been shut down for the first time in the country's history. The FAA says now that there will be no commercial air traffic in the United States until at least noon tomorrow. No commercial flights anywhere in the country, not just New York and Washington, anywhere until noon tomorrow. We know that many of you are just now coming home, joining us, and so we want to walk you through what has gone on both here in New York City and in Washington. We go to Atlanta and our colleague Joey Chin. Joey, good afternoon.
Aaron, extraordinary coverage there on the rooftops in New York of this extraordinary and horrific series of events that we have been watching throughout this day here on CNN. Acts of terrorism, and it's such an unprecedented scope and scale. It is really quite difficult to follow, and quite frankly, there had been an enormous amount of confusion as all of these events were unfolding through the day. So we are trying as best as we can to try to walk you through all this now, to bring you all up to date on what we know about the events that have taken place today. Beginning at 8:45 this morning, that is Eastern time, when the World Trade Center, the workday was well underway there in Lower Manhattan, an airliner crashing into one of the twin towers of the Trade Center. The people in New York, and then very quickly, people all around the nation watching just terrible horror as the thick black smoke billowed from the tower. But that, as it turned out, as it proved, was really just the beginning. 18 minutes later, just 18 minutes later, you see in the highlighted picture there on the right side, another very big commercial jumbo jet moving towards the other tower of the World Trade Center. And there you see again the explosion taking place on camera for all to see, quite apparently, quite specifically designed to do that. That was at 9:03 Eastern. Cameras were trained on the two twin centers. Of course, you know that the Trade Center was the target of a terror bombing back in 1993, which killed 6 people. The attack injured so many more, and it really does pale in comparison to what we are seeing today, although, as you just heard, For the mayor of the city of New York, nobody wants to make a guess yet on what the final toll will be. In the middle of all of this, suddenly Washington became a target. You see it here. This is the Pentagon, which we always view as some sort of a impenetrable fortress. Pentagon, the symbol of the nation's military might, also a command post today. Pentagon racked by the explosion that occurred at 9:45 this morning. Witnesses say that the commercial aircraft crashed into the Army side of the building. That has been confirmed by authorities. Is about this time that the federal government ordered all the nation's airports closed and ordered all planes in the air to get on the ground. And as you just heard from Aaron Brown, commercial aircraft will not be in the nation's skies again until sometime tomorrow. Now we'll move ahead to 10 o'clock Eastern. The first of the two Trade Center towers collapses, and you see the tremendous plume of smoke and debris left. This is an image we cannot forget. That was the visual sighting, and you see really just almost an explosion, an implosion, as it just gave away all that was left, the ash falling from the top of the tower as it came down. 29 minutes later, the second Trade Center tower collapsing. We can report that we know some 50,000 people work daily in the area of the Trade Center buildings. These towers are U.S. landmarks. They receive tens of thousands of visitors each day. The mayor of New York City has said that he does believe a horrendous number of lives has been lost in the course of this tragedy, but he did not want to wager any sort of speculation on what the final toll would be. At least one witness told us that in the moments before the buildings collapsed, he saw people leaping to try to save their own lives from the Trade Center towers. Back in Washington, we get a closer look at what occurred at the Pentagon. What was left, the great flames in the gaping hole of the Pentagon, apparently left by that hijacked plane that crashed into the Department of Defense. Again, we're told this is the Army side of the building of the Pentagon building, which of course has 5 sides. Now, commercial aircraft, we also know, has crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. That is southeast of Pittsburgh, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh along I-76. The report says that just before the crash, a passenger who was on board telephoned 911, saying that the plane had been hijacked and trying to get help. Now that would explain the crash there for all 4 planes that have been confirmed as being hijacked over U.S. skies today. Again, 2 crashing into the World Trade Center towers, 1 into the Pentagon, and this last one, you see the debris of it there in the agricultural area, the farming areas, the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. I want to now try to show you some live pictures now of Lower Manhattan at this hour. Again, you still see a thick plume of smoke there. Aaron Brown standing by again in his vantage point on a rooftop in New York City now. Aaron, what are you seeing?
Joey, thank you. We can see, as our viewers can see, the smoke continues to billow out of the Trade Center buildings 6 hours, more than 6 hours after the planes hit. 50,000 people going to work in those buildings. We're joined now on the phone by former Secretary of State James Baker and former Defense Secretary William Cohen. Mr. Baker, let me begin with you. You've been involved in some extraordinary events in the course of your government service. Can you give us any sense at all of what you expect it is like in the Situation Room right now?
Well, I'm sure that it's extraordinarily busy, and it is really a very sorrowful day for our country. We've lost many innocent civilians to what can only be characterized as a very dastardly and cowardly act. A terribly tragic day for America, but I really sense, Aaron, that we may be entering a bit of a new era, an era where we have been worried in the past about terrorism against America. We've always been able to handle it. We obviously were not in a position to handle it today. We do not know all the facts, but we can, I think, suppose and surmise a few things. And one of those is that it took a fairly, I think, sophisticated and complicated planning apparatus to plan and carry out these events.
And Secretary Cohen, not a lot of groups in the world would be capable of this degree of sophistication, would have the financing, the wherewithal to pull this off, would they?
I think that's correct. We don't know at this point exactly which group it is, but there
there aren't many that would have this degree of sophistication and ability to calibrate it so that you would have nearly simultaneous attacks on three important symbols and sites in the United States.
And sir, when we talk about not very many, are we talking about a handful, 3 or 4, a dozen? What do we mean?
I think we're talking about a handful of groups that would have this capability. Again, we don't know all the facts yet in terms of how they were able to gain access to the aircraft, what sort of weapons they had on board. Much of that information hopefully will become forthcoming in the next few weeks. But at this point, we simply have to gather all the information we can to make sure that we can carry out President Bush's vow to hunt down and punish those responsible for this, what Jim Baker just said, dastardly act. There are a few acts in our history that certainly measure up to the magnitude of the loss of life and what it means to this country, and I think that Jim Baker had it right. We're entering a new period, and it's going to cause us to focus our efforts in terms of reconciling what kind of society we can continue to have where we have a persistent threat against innocent civilians in a democratic society. We're going to have to engage in a very constructive and intense debate on how we measure the trade-offs between protecting our people and protecting our civil liberties. And that's a debate that has yet to begin in earnest, but I'm sure that it will.
We now know that the president is in Nebraska, that he is Sarasota, Florida this morning, where he was to give a speech on education to Louisiana. He's now in Nebraska participating in a national security briefing. Former Secretary of State George Shultz is with us as well. Mr. Secretary, I assume that most of the conversation is going from Washington to the president. What are they telling him, would you guess?
I don't know what we're telling him, but I know how I feel about this. First of all, there has been an act of war of the worst kind, namely against civilians, designed to disrupt and demoralize civilian life, as well as an act of war against the Pentagon. We know that this was carried out by an organization big enough to do something rather complex and complicated. So we have to know who those people are, and we have to go after them, but we have to do more than that. On the one hand, we have to learn what's coming and preempt it, and not be afraid to preempt potential terrorist acts against us. But then we have to look to our own security and give ourselves the kind of reassurance that we deserve, that we're doing the things necessary so we have our children back to our schools, our government officials back in their offices, and these people are not able to stop a resilient, powerful, strong country as we are.
Mr. Shultz, you said we ought not be afraid to preempt it. Have we been afraid to preempt it?
It's hard to preempt. No, well, we've done some in the past. It's hard to preempt because you have to know who it is you're going after very clearly and have the right kind of intelligence. But it only underlines the importance of strong intelligence, not only electronic intelligence and photography and so on, but we have to have a very capable human intelligence to know and be able to preempt these sorts of things.
Secretary Cohn, you were in office, if memory serves me correctly, when the Cole was attacked. Obviously, this is a much more horrific event. Did the Cole incident flash back in your mind?
It flashed back in my mind, but also the bombings in East Africa flashed even more vividly before me, because they were, again, nearly simultaneous explosions directed against innocent civilians. And to follow up on Secretary Shultz just mentioned, we indeed did gather together and vow to have the long-arm justice reach out and track those down who are responsible for it, but we also took preemptive action. That was the basis on our attack in Afghanistan, when we had intelligence that there was to be a gathering.
Well, we're obviously having a lot of crosstalk and technical problem. We'll sort it out and we'll try and get our guests back. We mentioned a moment ago there were 50,000 people who come to work each day at the World Trade Center. There are literally tens of thousands more who come into the city, each of them affected. But the effect of this, we suspect, is much broader than that it'll affect everyone in the country. Former Secretary of State George Shultz says American life been changed. I know forever seems a bit farther than I want to go, but American life been changed today?
No. American life will pick up. We have to look to our security, obviously, and be careful about it. But we're not going to allow these terrible people to change our way of life. They just aren't going to be able to do it. We defend ourselves adequately. We will find out who they are. We will get rid of them, and we'll learn how to preempt these attacks. But we're not going to change our way of life because of these people. I reject that entirely.
And so we respond, and then people get on airplanes again with the same sense of security that they had before. People go to the Trade Center with the same sense of security they had before.
I'm afraid it'll be a while before they go to the Trade Center. But as far as the use of commercial aircraft are concerned, yes, I think we'll have our aircraft back in operation. We'll have to have tighten and be very careful as people get on these planes so that we feel secure that we've done everything possible to keep people off who obviously took over a plane. They did it very skillfully. The pilots apparently weren't able to put out any kind of an SOS, and they must have been able to fly the plane. So we're dealing with an organized group. They have to have a safe haven somewhere that allows them to do these things. So let's go after them.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us today. Secretary of State, former Secretary of State George Shultz, James Baker, former Secretary of State as well, and Secretary of the Treasury, and William Cohen, former Senator from Maine and Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration, all joining in and all offering similar messages that what happened today cannot be allowed to change the basic core of American life, and that the United States must hold accountable and responsible not simply those who carried out these actions in New York and in Washington, and perhaps another plane as well, the plane that crashed in Pittsburgh, but also any government that has turned a blind eye to terrorist groups, that has offered them safe haven or support, financial, physical support, whatever, that they must be held accountable as well. James Kallstrom, former FBI here in New York, joins us. He's in Delaware. Mr. Kallstrom, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
What are you hearing? Are you hearing things now? Do you have a network of people who are calling in, or that you're calling, who are telling you what they're finding out?
Well, I certainly have a network of friends, and they're busy doing their work, not calling me. The only people calling me right now are the news media.
Okay. What's going through your mind? What are the questions beyond the most obvious? Who did this? What is it that you want to know?
First off, just the immense tragedy of this event and the desire to save as many people as we can save in this terrible, terrible situation. Second thought is that, you know, since '93, with the bombing of the World Trade Center the first time, people that hate us and hate what we stand for and hate our way of life have demonstrated that over and over again. I don't have to go through all the different events, but we all know what they are. And today, they brought that terrible hatred to the United States of America, and we as a country, as a nation, need to stand together. I agree totally with George Shultz, who I admire tremendously, that we need to go find out who these people are, and with respect to collateral damage, we need to not let this happen again. And I think this puts about 5 exclamation points on why we in this country need a sophisticated, dedicated, high morale team of intelligence agencies and law enforcement that work together. Not that if it was any better than it was the last 5 years, I'm not saying it wasn't good, but it needs to be the best and continue to be the best.
But you're suggesting it has not been good enough.
Well, in a free society, you know, it's virtually impossible to know everything about every bunch of cowards and crazy people that populate the world, unfortunately. But we need to get as close to that as possible without changing our way of life. And I think that exclamation point just hits home today, and we need to stop this. We need not to change our way of life. We need to find out who did this, and I'll tell you right now, that's a short list of people. And our government knows pretty much what that short list is. They're putting the final touches, I'm sure, and will over the course of the next few hours, next few days, and we need to do something about it.
Sir, thank you for your time today. Appreciate joining. We have shown you a number of times the video of this second plane that at 9:08 hit the Trade Center. We have, I believe, some still pictures of that plane as it moved. I'm seeing them for the first time with you, so bear with us. You can see that in the first shot, the plane approaching the Trade Center. And here in the second frame, you can see in the front, I believe what we saw there was the plumes of smoke and fire from the hit on the first building. The plane now visibly closer to the Trade Center building. It is just the most extraordinary and painful thing to look at because you know what's happening. Mr. Kallstrom, are you able to see these pictures, by the way? Mr. Kallstrom?
Yes, I am.
Were you able to see those?
I was able to see that, yes.
As you watch that, as you've seen that, I hear the anger builds, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does build. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
I mean, we're trained in many ways, both of us, by profession, not to use words like unbelievable, and then you confront moments like this where, in fact, unbelievable is about the only word that seems to apply.
Yeah, I just can't, having lived through the tragedy of TWA Flight 800, which, as sad as that was, I mean, this is geometrically worse. And just thinking about the personal terror of all the people involved in this, the people on those planes. I'm sure there's teenagers and babies and adults and just normal people on those airplanes that suffered tremendous terrorism.
Yes, sir, it is hard to imagine what it must have been like on those 4 airplanes, because while the attacks on the buildings themselves happened quite quickly, these people in these airplanes were aware that something horrible was happening for perhaps an hour. The flight from Boston to New York, right around an hour, a little bit less. Clearly they knew this was something horrible had come into their lives. And they knew it for a long time.
That's probably true. And think about the fact that people obviously took control of the plane and knew something about flying one of these sophisticated fly-by-wire airplanes. I don't know how much they knew. They knew enough, obviously, to crash it into the building. I can't imagine any American pilot crashing an airplane into one of these buildings.
Now, sir,
even with a gun to their head, they wouldn't do that.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, that it is unimaginable to me, at least, that any pilot, no matter the circumstance, would have followed that order, crashed that plane into this building or that building. I don't know what they would have done, how they'd have dealt with it, but it is unimaginable they would have followed that order.
So you've got people that not only are willing to give up their lives for just a horrendously, in my view, stupid, cowardly act, but are sophisticated enough to fly a modern jet plane.
It was described by Secretary of State Shultz, and I don't know if you heard it, as an act of war against the United States. Do you see this as an act of war?
I think it's clearly an act of war. I think it's, in many ways, it's a different time, but it's everything that Pearl Harbor was and more. It just puts an exclamation point next to this dangerous world we live in, and the inability to appease people that are this demented with rhetoric. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. We can see what happened today. All peace-loving people of the world, all people that believe in democracy and freedom need to stand against this. Any country that harbors or aids this type of activity anywhere in the world needs to declare which side they're on, and we need to seriously do something about this, and I believe we will.
Mr. Kellstrom, thank you for joining us to Washington, and our colleague Judy Woodruff. Judy.
Aaron, again, listening to your conversation with James Kellstrom and the others, it's we can only begin to grasp the magnitude of what's happened here. And I keep thinking back to what your New York City Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, said about 30 minutes ago. He looked at the camera and he said, it's safe here in New York City, everything is safe, but I would just say, without contradicting the mayor at all, that for so many people watching these pictures, it's very hard to believe or to know what is safe after 4 commercial jetliners caused the deaths that we have seen today. We have right now, we want to show you some pictures, some conversations with people on the streets of New York City this morning about the time of the airplane crashes into the World Trade Center. Let's listen.
The actual airplane hitting the building. It was surreal. As we looked at it, we thought it was something out of a movie. It just didn't seem real. The airplane just came in at its tilt. We heard the scream of the plane, then a crack, 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 boom, 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 and the plane just disappeared. You didn't see the plane anymore, and then you saw the blowout from the other side.
A lot of people equate this to something like Pearl Harbor. You were there. You saw this. Put yourself in perspective that this is nothing's ever happened like this.
Well, I now have images that will never leave my mind. As I'm walking up from, we walked down from downtown up to Grand Central here, and I just keep seeing that airplane hitting. I saw also, prior to the second airplane hitting, while we were still standing there, I must have saw about 7 or 8 bodies flying through the air, coming from 80 floors up. Just, they'd fall from the debris, and you just saw them cartwheeling down, bouncing off the building. It was devastating. I'm not an emotional person in the least, and I actually felt tremendous emotion at that point, because I do have a lot of friends in both buildings. And I do know that last time, as I said, it took 2.5 hours for somebody on the 70th floor to get out of that building. It's absolutely devastating. I believe, being down there, is tens of thousands of people dead. That's what I believe at this point.
You say you're not an emotional person. I see your eyes.
I'm not emotional in the least, and now I'm very emotional about this. I have feelings of revenge, but I just sure hope that the government doesn't arbitrarily select an enemy and decide to, for political reasons, obliterate that enemy just for this. But I do hope they find the people that are responsible for this.
You're shot in the back. Shot. Joe, what do you do?
And fell and just hit and just blew out the plaza we were on.
It was complete dark. There is no light. So thank God somebody with little light came up, because we couldn't even see what's happening. We all, with dust and debris and.
How'd you get out?
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to. What did you do? I'm sorry.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
CNN producer Rose Arce on the streets of New York. She's joining us by telephone. Rose, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Judy.
What are you seeing? Tell us where you are.
I am about 2 blocks north of where the World Trade Center used to be standing, and I'm surrounded by firefighters who are just watching helplessly. They've had to suspend their rescue operation, and they're just watching a burning hulk of building right now. The front part of the World Trade Center has completely sheared off, as well as many of the upper floors. And every few minutes you'll hear like a small sort of a rumbling sound, almost like an explosion sound, and another chunk of it will come flying down into the street. creating a situation where rescue personnel just have not been able to get close to this building now for over an hour.
Rose, how close are they to the building?
I'd say the closest people are probably about 2 blocks north of there, just in front of where I am. I spoke to a firefighter a few minutes ago that said that he had to stand there and watch helplessly as at least a dozen people leapt from the upper floors of this building during a fire.
Rose, when the mayor was asked this question at a news conference a little while ago, he said he wasn't able to answer, but given your vantage point, can you tell how large a perimeter, how many square blocks are we talking about that's been devastated?
Well, I'd say that at least, up to 4 blocks north, really 5 blocks north of the World Trade Center, there is debris on top of buildings. There are buildings that have been pierced by debris. The streets are covered with several inches of soot and literally pieces of people's desks. There's office supplies. Where I'm standing right now, I can see there's letters on the floor. There's one woman's resume. There's some insurance papers. Things that clearly came from inside that building.
And Rose, where, again, you are how close to what's going on here?
I'm about, I'd say about 2.5 blocks north of the World Trade Center.
And are you still seeing victims injured being taken away or walking away, or is
No, right now there's absolutely nobody that's getting anywhere close to that building. There's just a huge and enormous pieces of debris just falling one right after the other. And as I said, firefighters a lot of them are just standing here helpless, wanting to go in and try to fight the fire, but just can't get any closer because of safety problems.
And Rose, is your sense that there are enough emergency personnel there once they can? I mean, are there? Give us a sense of how many emergency personnel you see.
There's an absolute small army of fire safety people. I mean, I even see Immigration and Naturalization Service officers, federal marshals. There are trucks from all over New York. I see license plates, New Jersey. People from upstate New York. There's just a small army of people here, but there's just really not a whole lot that they can do for whoever may be left right now, because it is just such a dangerous situation.
CNN producer Rose Arce, she's talking to us right now. She's a few blocks away from the World Trade Center, describing efforts by rescue personnel who just cannot get close because it is still a very dangerous situation. You heard her say large pieces of debris still coming down. And these pictures we're showing you, all of them taken earlier in the day since the first airplane hit the World Trade Center about 8:48 this morning. And again, these are those still pictures that Aaron first referred to a few minutes ago. Still pictures of a commercial jetliner. This was the second one to come in. This was the plane, United Airlines Flight 175 that we now know has to be the one that Boeing 767 bound from Boston to Los Angeles. Instead, it ended up inside and going through incomprehensibly one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Just about a block and a half away here in Washington, a block and a half away from the White House, CNN senior White House correspondent John King. John, you were not traveling, of course, with President Bush, who went to Florida yesterday, but you have been talking to a number of people around the president who are trying to stay on top of what's happened.
Trying to stay on top of what has happened, Judy, despite the fact that from the ground up anyway, the White House complex, which you see behind me, the building itself and the old executive office building, which is home to a number of senior administration officials, a virtual ghost town, evacuated this morning. The president, as we have reported, is now at a military installation in the Midwest. The president, first from Florida, stopped at a military installation in Louisiana. He was briefed. Then there was talk that he would come back to Washington, and administration officials saying they believe that is politically very important to send a signal to get the president back to the White House as soon as possible. But the president instead stopped at a second military installation in Nebraska. We are told he is participating in a National Security Council meeting by telephone. Vice President Dick Cheney has been in the White House, underground in the White House Operations Center, the Situation Room, which is a fortified command and control structure, throughout the day with other national security officials, receiving information from around the country and directing U.S. operations from there. We do know on Air Force One en route from Louisiana to the Midwest, the president spoke to the mayor of New York and the governor of New York. He's been in constant contact with officials back here, including members of the congressional leadership, who also have been asked by their security to go to a secure bunker area built for just such a situation, a national security emergency in the United States. The leaders of Congress taken as well to a secure location. Again, the White House grounds were evacuated when all this was taking place this morning. From this perch up here, which you are familiar with from anchoring Inside Politics, you can still see smoke wafting up from the Pentagon and National Airport across the Potomac River, usually one of the nation's busiest, of course, now completely shut down as part of the security precautions being taken here. We are told there is a priority on trying to get the president back to the White House, but priority number one is the president's security. And I've spoken to several senior administration officials as well as some security sources who say at this moment they know of no specific additional threats. But of course, they were caught so completely off guard this morning, extra precautions being taken because of the scope of these devastating terrorist attacks. Judy?
All right, John King at a location on top of an office building just a few blocks from the White House, as you can see, reporting on the scene there where every federal building in the city of Washington has been evacuated. Joining us now on the telephone, former Georgia United States Senator Sam Nunn. Senator Nunn, are you in Atlanta, New York?
Judy, I'm in Wilmington, Delaware.
All right. Senator, longtime leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee, someone who has followed military affairs in this country for so long. What are you thinking right now?
First, it was certainly a day of hate in terms of what was perpetrated by whoever did this, and second, a day of sorrow for the people who are the victims and their families. And it certainly was a cruel and heartless and monstrous type attack. I think it's very important that we steadfast in this country. We always rise to the occasion and work together when we're in a crisis, and I think this qualifies for mustering the American will to remain calm and collected and determined and firm, but most of all, solidarity here at home with the president, following his lead with the governors, with mayors, with the people on the scene, the front lines, the firemen and the policemen and the medical personnel and the nurses and the doctors, people we take for granted every day, but God bless them, and we need to be with them and behind them and help them in every way we can.
Good morning, Tony Jones in the ABC's National Newsroom, just breaking in again to the CNN coverage to sum up developments so far. The United States and the world has been stunned by an unprecedented series of terrorist attacks in the US Northeast. 4 American airliners have been hijacked and used to smash into prominent US buildings. 2 of the planes bringing down the twin World Trade Center towers in Manhattan. Casualties aboard the planes are confirmed in the hundreds, but the final toll is expected to be far higher. The World Trade Center towers normally hold tens of thousands of people on a weekday morning. A 3rd airliner smashed into the Pentagon building in Washington, D.C. The 4th came down near Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. World condemnation of the attacks has been swift, except among militant Palestinians who have rejoiced at the terrorist actions. In the West Bank town of Nablus, people cheered and fired their weapons into the air as news of the US disasters spread. And while no one has claimed responsibility for the devastation, militant groups have blamed the attacks on Washington's Mideast policy. Well, New Yorkers who survived the attacks witnessed horrific scenes, including people leaping from the towers to escape the smoke and flames.
There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
We heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
President George W. Bush has vowed no stone will be left unturned in the hunt for the perpetrators, nor will the United States be intimidated, he says, by the attack.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Once again, we see terrorism, we see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose. They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy.
And as security around the world is being stepped up, criticism of the attack from leaders past and present has been strident, with calls to end the tyranny of terrorism. And the Prime Minister, we're told, Prime Minister Howard, that is, has been moved under tight security from his hotel in Washington to the Australian Embassy, and we've now receiving part of his press conference. Here's what he had to say.
Security coordinator involving the departments of the Attorney General, the Defence and ASIO. ASIO, of course, is continuing to provide assessments. In other words, all the appropriate responses are being undertaken in Australia, both in relation to American assets and also having regard to obvious tensions in relation to Israeli and Jewish assets in our country. I think the only other thing I can say to you is really on behalf of all the Australians here is to say to our American friends whom we love and admire so much, we really feel for you. It is a terrible day. It's a day that recalls the words used by President Roosevelt in 1940. It's a day of infamy, that an attack of this kind can be made in such an indiscriminate fashion, not upon military assets, as was the case in Pearl Harbor, but upon innocent civilians, men, women, children going about their daily lives. And as I say, words aren't very adequate, but they are a sign that we feel for our American friends. We will stand by them, we will help them, we will support actions they take to properly retaliate in relation to these acts of bastardry against their citizens and against what they stand for. America has been hurt by today's events, but the American spirit will not be daunted or bowed or diminished by these events. The resolution of the American people will be evident, and they will respond, and they will respond in accordance with the courageous traditions of their country.
Mr. Howard, what are your immediate plans?
And that was part of a press conference that the Prime Minister recorded earlier in Washington. And the ABC's Jim Middleton has been travelling with Mr. and Mrs. Howard in the United States, and he joins us now by phone. Jim, what did Mr. Howard say exactly about the possibility of Australian casualties out of this?
Well, he didn't say anything directly, but it is worth noting that one of the four planes which crashed either into the World Trade Center or the Pentagon or in Pennsylvania was a United Airlines flight which was connecting with a Qantas flight in Los Angeles. It was flying from, an American Airlines flight that was flying from Dulles Airport outside Washington to Los Angeles to connect with an Qantas flight, which means it's quite likely that there are some, if not many, Australian casualties as a consequence of this terrorist action here in the United States today.
Now, Jim, did the Prime Minister actually confirm that that was a feeder flight for a Qantas flight? Because a lot of people are going to be rather frightened to hear that news.
Well, that is what he told us at his news conference earlier on today. Yes, it is quite disturbing news, but as I understand it, that is the case.
Now, what has he said about special security arrangements in Australia?
Well, he has talked about, as you heard, protection for American installations and also Jewish community places of worship, etc. and he has stepped up arrangements in relation to ASIO and to security in general.
At what point, Jim, was Mr Howard himself and his entourage transferred to the Australian Embassy?
Well, what happened, Tony, was that at about 9:20 this morning, the Prime Minister was holding a news conference on the Tampa crisis. At about 9:30, whispers emerged in the press conference room that there had been a bomb at the Pentagon. As it turned out, of course, it was a plane crashing into the Pentagon. And looking out the window from the hotel where the Prime Minister is staying, which is about 3 blocks from the White House and about, say, 5 kilometres from the Pentagon, you could actually see the plumes of smoke emerging. At that stage, there was a considerable amount of confusion, but within about an hour, American Secret Service whisked the Prime Minister and his entourage out of the Willard Hotel here in downtown Washington and to the Australian Embassy, which is about a kilometre away, where they were then kept in a secure area in the basement of the embassy until things became a little clearer. And since then, the Prime Minister has been in contact with members of the government back in Australia, John Anderson in particular, who's acting Prime Minister in his absence, to make arrangements for whatever is needed in terms of security and so on and so forth. One thing I would also add, Tony, is that this effectively means the end of the Prime Minister's trip. He has already cancelled the New York leg of his visit. He was due to go there in 2 days' time. Tomorrow, of course, he was due to address a joint session of Congress, and that would have been the first time that had happened since Bob Hawke back in 1989. Now, while at this stage I don't have any information one way or the other about that, it would seem in the circumstances highly unlikely that the Prime Minister's address to Congress will go ahead. So effectively, his trip to the United States is over at this moment. There's the question of how he gets back to Australia with a great deal of concern within the United States, obviously, about airline security.
Yes, I mean, he clearly can't get on any planes at the moment since all the airports
Well, all
are
planes
closed.
are grounded at the moment, and it will remain that way, as I understand it, until around midday tomorrow, Washington time.
Now, Jim, just on a broader level, this would have to rank, although no one is talking about it in any detail at the moment, as one of the greatest failures of US intelligence since Pearl Harbor.
It certainly is that. It certainly is the case. I mean, it is the case that not only did they not know about it, but when you think of just how sophisticated an operation this was, that it involved a number of airports, that the people who were involved chose planes that would have maximum fuel loads at the time that they were going to hit their designated targets, and presumably knew how to fly the planes as well. Otherwise, this sort of kamikaze operation could not have occurred. It's it's quite a considerable breach of American security.
All right, Jim Middleton, thanks for joining us tonight, or this morning as it happens.
Pleasure, Tony.
As security around the world is being stepped up, criticism of the attack from leaders past and present has been strident, with calls to end the tyranny of terrorism.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together to fight it together and eradicate this evil completely from our world.
And what we have to do now is, in the wake of this horrific tragedy, is to unite all the forces of freedom in the world for a concerted battle against the forces of terrorism.
Avec une immense émotion.
At this most difficult of hours for the American people, the German people are right behind the people of the United States of America. I've told the US President, George Bush, that he has Germany's unreserved solidarity. At this time, the thoughts of all Germans are with the victims and their next of kin.
Well, with no one yet claiming responsibility for the deadly and brutal attacks, suspicion is being directed at Saudi dissident and well-known terrorist Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden lives in Afghanistan as a guest of the hardline Taliban regime, but the Taliban have rejected suggestions that he was involved in the plane attacks. The ABC's South Asia correspondent Jonathan Harley spoke to senior members of the Taliban government a short time ago, and he joins me now. Jonathan, you were at that Taliban press conference. What are they exactly saying about Osama bin Laden?
Tony, Foreign Minister Wakil Ahmad Mutawakil has dissociated the Taliban or Osama bin Laden from having any involvement. He condemned the attacks, describing them as vast and terrifying, and say that there is no suggestion from anyone officially. He said that there could have been any involvement by Osama bin Laden, as you say, who is a guest of the Taliban holed up in their southern stronghold city of Kandahar.
We spoke earlier to Tim Palmer, our Middle East correspondent in Jerusalem, and he suggested that the bin Laden organisation in Afghanistan is virtually a mini-state or a state within a state. Does the Taliban at least acknowledge the power that he has within Afghanistan?
The Taliban describe him as a guest, but also say that they host him without any communication with the outside world. The Taliban pretend that there is no way that he can, as is often alleged, be at the centre of this vast Islamic network in which he has many times called for a jihad against Americans, describing it as an Islamic duty. So the Taliban really trying to play down the possible activities by Osama bin Laden, but such comments, such assurances by the Taliban will come as cold comfort to many who regard him, Osama bin Laden, as being at the centre of a vast Islamic terrorist network and having been involved masterminding bombing attacks on the World Trade Center in 1993, in which 7 people died, and even American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania almost exactly 3 years ago, in which 220 people were killed.
Jonathan, do you get the impression that the Taliban is preparing itself now for possible US reprisal attacks?
If they are, they're giving away no signs of it. Wakil Ahmad Mutawakil said such precautions were unnecessary. It was too early to hold such precautions. He ruled out the possibility of a state of emergency, again reinforcing the line that since there is no involvement by the Taliban or by Osama bin Laden, then such measures would be unnecessary. But history really would point in the other direction because of the 1998 attacks on American embassies, in which Washington accused Osama bin Laden of masterminding them. Shortly afterwards, those bombings, 70 cruise missiles were fired on 2 assumed bases of Osama bin Laden's in Afghanistan, in which several people were killed here. So the Taliban are really playing down any concerns that they may have. But really, it's about just gone midnight here in Kabul, and it does seem that people are nervous that recriminations could be round the corner. People are huddled around radios. People are really speculating what could be the next step, and there really is fear and anticipation that Afghanistan may be at the centre of what President Bush described as hunting down and punishing those responsible for these attacks.
Well, I think we're getting some signals from at least former US officials that this is precisely what might happen. Richard Holbrooke on CNN not so long ago made the point that anyone who'd even sheltered those responsible will be themselves held responsible for committing an act of war. And Mr. Holbrooke, I believe, said that all evidence points to Osama bin Laden and the Taliban leaders. Is it sinking in, do you think, that they're being accused in this way?
Well, if it is, it doesn't seem to be setting off any alarm bells among the Taliban. So certainly, I mean, as I said, it's quite late here. It's midnight. Curfew was imposed on the capital, as it always is, at 11 o'clock. So it's going to be very difficult to get any information for the next few hours here. I guess it's part of the Taliban strategy to present itself as innocent in all of this. But really, if they really are making no precautions, it would certainly be against, as you say, the rather strong signals that are starting to emerge out of Washington.
All right, Jonathan Harley, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. And here once again is the hotline number for people worried about friends and family in the United States. The number is 1300 555 135. That number again is 1300 555 135. And Telstra advises that the 1300 number is still the best prospect for getting updated information about Australians in the US. Those are the latest developments. We'll turn now to the CNN coverage, but we'll have a full ABC coverage of today's event shortly at 6 o'clock.
People, some of these people with connections to the terrorist organizations must have been at the cockpit. Joining us now, and I believe he is in a studio, George Terwilliger, who has had a career of following the activities of intelligence organization, has become an expert on terrorist activities. I'm sorry, we're not going to go to George Terwilliger. We're going to go to White House spokeswoman, Counselor Karen Hughes in Omaha.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens, and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his cabinet and national security team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
Karen, how long will the president stay in Nebraska?
Return to the White House?
Will he go back to Washington, Karen? Will he address the nation? If the vice president can stand...
Presidential Counselor Karen Hughes in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters of the FBI talking to reporters, and very unusual, she did not take questions, which normally would be the case for someone speaking in a spokesperson's capacity. But what we heard from Ms. Hughes is that all appropriate precautions are being taken. She said the president is in a secure location, the vice president, and is in continuous contact, she said, with Vice President Cheney. She mentioned again that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon. Secretary of State Powell, she said, at an undisclosed location. She said she went through, ticked off a list of measures that have been taken to assure that the federal government of this country continues to operate. She said a plan was put in place after the first attack on the World Trade Center this morning, and she said it has been in operation ever since. In an effort to be reassuring, she said on high alert, the United States forces were put on high alert. American embassies abroad, the same thing. She said not just the president and the vice president, but also when you think about the succession to the presidency, the Speaker of the House would be third in line after, or second in line after the vice president. She said the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, has also been put in a safe, or taken to a safe but undisclosed location. CNN senior White House correspondent John King at a location since the White House was mainly evacuated about a block away. John?
Well, Judy, Karen Hughes working throughout the day in the White House Situation Room in the basement of the White House at a fortified structure.
A great deal during the day. It's going to last for a number of days. We told the president that we thought that the whole rescue effort would take a week or so or more. But the main focus right now, obviously, is on saving as many lives as possible. I think it's still possible for us to save a lot of the people that are there.
You said that we're in a state of alert, and I'm wondering, people who say, well, how can we ever in a state of alert with all of our police and firefighters?
They're not all there. All of our police and firefighters are not there. We have a lot of police and firefighters. Bernie, do you want to explain where the police and firefighters are?
Do we have a death toll there?
No, we do not, and we're not going to put one out until much later, after we get a better sense of the numbers we're talking about.
The police and the police deployment is, primary focus is down in southern Manhattan in the rescue effort, but we're tending to our policing needs all over the city. We, as the mayor said earlier, we're getting assistance from the governor and the National Guard. About 200 National Guardsmen about 2 hours, about an hour ago, I guess. There'll be another about 1,500 sometime this evening to come in to help us. And we're going to continue on the rescue efforts, but policing will go on in the rest of the city as usual.
State of alert for other possible actions. How is that going?
Obviously, we're in a high state of alert. We're looking at other government buildings, securing those buildings, securing other areas in the city. Right now, our primary focus and our efforts are in southern Manhattan.
One more, please.
I don't think anybody. The mayor and I were there this morning. I was there when the second plane hit the building. I was right underneath the building. I don't think anybody would have imagined that one of those airliners would have hit the building like that. Nobody in their right mind would have thought that would happen. So, and in this circumstance, it was something we couldn't avoid. We couldn't have stopped, even if we tried.
Thank you. Thank you. We've been listening to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, obviously fairly close to the site of where the rescue operations are underway in New York City, reassuring that every effort's being made to get as many people out and to hospitals as they possibly can. Now, back here in Washington, let's return to our senior White House correspondent, John King. John, and let's talk about what the White House is doing, and some of which we heard about from Karen Hughes, who's a counselor to the president just a minute ago.
Well, Judy, some of this involves security precautions, which is one of the reasons the president is not yet back in Washington. He is now in Nebraska at a military air base conducting a National Security Council meeting, although at the White House they are putting a priority to getting him back as soon as possible. They believe that picture of the president returning to the White House would send a powerful signal. You heard both Karen Hughes here in Washington, Mayor Giuliani just again in New York, trying to reassure the citizens that the government is at work despite these atrocities today. They very much want to get the president back. Now, from an operational standpoint, the Vice President and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in the Situation Room in the basement of the White House. That is the command and control system used for natural disasters, used for terrorist attacks like this one, used in the case of major military operations. That has been up and running throughout the day. The senior staff at the White House operating out of that. Ms. Hughes, on the one hand, trying to send reassuring signals, saying the government was up and running, the financial systems were up and running. Yet on the other hand, she too noted the remarkable paralysis this event, these terrorist attacks, have caused in the United States. Commercial air systems shut down nationwide at least through noon tomorrow. Security officials still not confident enough to bring the president back to Washington. So Karen Hughes delivering a statement, bringing us up to date on the activities and the movements of the president and the vice president, at the same time saying the United States government still looking into who is responsible for this. And I know David Ensor is standing by with more information. White House officials saying their early indications are that they believe, and David may have more information, that these attacks are linked to the suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden. Judy?
All right, John, you are right. David Ensor, our national security correspondent here in the studio in Washington. David, I know you've been on the telephone. What have you been able to learn?
U.S. officials are saying that they now have new and specific information, and they say this information is good indications that people with links to Osama bin Laden may have been responsible for these attacks. I asked, is this new information that's come in since the attacks? Yes, it is. Is it specific in nature? Yes, it is. Now, they're not completely eliminating the possibility that the attacks could have come from somewhere else, not ruling out a Saddam Hussein-inspired attack or some kind of combination of Palestinian groups or some other combination, but good indications that people with links to bin Laden may have been behind the attack, and this is new and specific information, the officials say. They are also expressing a certain amount of what I think is best described as anger.
The world's worst terrorist attack in the United States as hijacked planes slam into New York's World Trade Center, razing the buildings, and a simultaneous attack on the Pentagon in Washington. Good morning. This is a special ABC News Bulletin. I'm Jane Hutchin. What is shaping as the worst terrorist attack in world history has taken place across the United States. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people have died in an apparently coordinated attack that has razed New York's World Trade Center and destroyed parts of the Pentagon in Washington. 3 commercial airliners were hijacked and crashed into both towers of the Trade Center and the Pentagon. A 4th plane inexplicably crashed in Pennsylvania around the same time. The U.S. National Security Council is meeting to plan a response, and all civilian air movements in the country have been suspended. Precise death tolls are not available, but American Airlines and United Airlines say there were a total of 266 people aboard the missing aircraft. The attacks have drawn condemnation from world leaders and sparked a huge security clampdown on US facilities around the world. No one has claimed responsibility for the attacks. Up to 50,000 people normally work inside the World Trade Center in New York. Now it's just a smoking ruin.
Horror beyond description on a New York morning. First one plane crashes into a tower of the World Trade Center, then another.
After the first plane hit, I just saw a second plane come in from the south and hit the south tower halfway between the bottom and the top of the tower. It's got to be a terrorist attack. I can't tell you anything more than that. I saw the plane hit the building.
And there was much worse to come.
There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
We heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
Hundreds of people trapped in the World Trade Center desperately signaled for help.
The building was shaking, then I saw chunks of debris just falling down because I was close to the window. It was unbelievable.
But for most, there was no way out. The huge towers collapsed, one after the other, captured live on American television.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed. There is panic on the streets, thousands of people running up Church Street, which is what I'm looking out on.
As pandemonium gripped Manhattan, Washington came under attack. Another airliner was crashed into the Pentagon. Around the same time, a fourth aircraft came down in Pennsylvania. As government buildings were evacuated, the president, diverted from a return to Washington for security reasons, said his country was reeling from a national tragedy.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Just how many people have died from the coordinated assaults on the symbols of American business and government will not be known for some time. But it is confirmed that 156 people were on the two aircraft that were crashed into the World Trade Center. Paul Lockyer, ABC News.
The ABC's Prue Clark lives in New York, a few blocks from the World Trade Center. She joins us now on the line. Prue, how did you become aware of the first strike on the World Trade Towers?
Believe it or not, I just heard on the radio that there'd been an incident. That was at about 10 to 9. I was on my way to work. I walked outside and looked at the building, which is about 15 blocks south of my house, and there was the gaping great hole, as you've seen. I couldn't believe it. People around me couldn't believe it. A lot of people were sort of walking towards the World Trade Center, which I did too. A lot of people were in shock and kind of screaming. They obviously knew people inside the building. But coming the other way were the evacuees who were all in a terrible state. They were crying. And at that point, as I was walking down, it was perhaps 8 blocks of the second plane hit, and I only knew that because I was listening to the radio, and I didn't actually even hear it, which was extraordinary to me. And then just kept walking. There was sort of no police action at that point, not much control, and they let me come right up close, about a block away from the World Trade Center. There was debris and glass everywhere, all over the cars. Only a few police. And there were a few people standing there, and the police kind of moved us on, and I'm terribly glad they did, because we were, perhaps no more than 3 blocks north of the World Trade Center when the South building collapsed.
And can you tell me what that was like, Prue?
It was absolutely horrifying. There was a roar, and then the building just began to disappear as it sort of imploded, I think. and people were in shock. They were screaming and running up the street. There was a stampede. We really thought we were going to die on that street, I think, and this a massive plume of debris and dirt rushed up the street towards us and sort of overcame a lot of us. And then we were perhaps 8 blocks away, and when that all sort of subsided, and we turned around and just looked at the building, and that was when people started to realise that many people were jumping from the north building of the World Trade Center from the 85th floor. A lot of them were alight as they fell, but most of them were just jumping to escape the flames, I assume.
Prue, this event happened about 7 hours ago. Is there any indication yet of the death toll?
There's no indication whatsoever. The emergency services have just refused to answer that question. Rudy Giuliani, the mayor, has done the same. I mean, they appreciate they're talking thousands. They say that there are about 20,000 people in the building, probably at that point in time. But, it was an hour between when the first plane hit and when the building, the south building collapsed. So presumably a lot of people would have got out in that time, and I have heard stories, many people that I know actually who got out in that time. But I have heard as well that during the World Trade Center bombing, and remember these buildings are 110 stories high, the World Trade Center bombing, they started evacuating people at 10 o'clock and they were still coming out at 6 o'clock that night. So a lot of people wouldn't have escaped, and the buildings surrounding that as well, I would think, when the two main buildings collapsed, would have taken a fair bit of force as well. And we're sort of being moved along at the moment. There's a fire in a building next door to where the World Trade Center towers were, and a lot of people speculating that one might be about to fall.
Prue,
but the most alarming thing, I think, is that we've seen hundreds of ambulances go in and very few ambulances come out at this point.
How are people on the street reacting?
Well, at the time it was just total disbelief. We were standing there watching people coming out, jumping out of the building, and people were sighing and in shock and screaming and terrified, and also people coming out of the subways because they were afraid that was just the beginning and that subways might be the next point of attack. But it's now 7 hours, as you said, and people are sort of calming down. These are New Yorkers after all, and while this is extraordinary, they do sort of take life in its stride, and they just 10 blocks north of the disaster area, people are sitting in cafes and having lunch. I have heard too, as I'm walking around, a few sort of anti-Arab calls as well. I don't know if that's a reflection of a broader sentiment in this point.
Okay, Prue Clark, many thanks for joining us from New York. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani has declared a state of emergency as the city tries to cope with the size of the disaster. The city has called in all off-duty medical personnel and has appealed for more ambulances from surrounding New York State. In an interview he recorded earlier with CNN, he expressed grave fears for the number of casualties among the city's emergency services workers.
A large number of police, fire, EMS personnel have also been injured in this. Can you shed any light on that?
I don't even want to contemplate what the number will be. But when the building collapsed, we had a lot of our police officers and firefighters in the building, and I know many of them because I saw some of them go in because I was there, and I'm praying for them. I just hope they're able to get out. I never thought I would see something like this happen. I got there after the first plane hit and before the second, and watching people jump from the top of the World Trade Center is an unbelievable sight.
It's a horrific day, Mr. Mayor.
There's no possible way to begin to describe it.
No, there is not.
To see what happened there is, of course, it makes you very, very angry. It's almost impossible to describe the level of anger that you have that somebody or someone would do something like this. There's no reason for this. There's no excuse for this. And there's something like this is just something you never thought you would live to see.
The Prime Minister, John Howard, was in Washington when the attacks occurred. He said the images would stay with him forever, and he expressed sorrow that any country could be attacked in such a cowardly way.
Here is to say to our American friends, whom we love and admire so much, we really feel for you. It is a terrible day. It's a day that recalls the words used by President Roosevelt in 1940. It's a day of infamy, that an attack of this kind can be made in such an indiscriminate fashion, not upon military assets, as was the case in Pearl Harbor, but upon innocent civilians, men, women, children going about their daily lives. And as I say, words aren't very adequate, but they are a sign that we feel for our American friends. We will stand by them, we will help them, we will support actions they take to properly retaliate in relation to these acts of bastardry against their citizens and against what they stand for. America has been hurt by today's events, but the American spirit will not be daunted or bowed or diminished by these events. The resolution of the American people will be evident, and they will respond, and they will respond in accordance with the courageous traditions of their country.
Our political correspondent, Jim Middleton, is travelling with the Prime Minister, and he joins us now from Washington. Jim, we understand one of the missing aircraft was a connecting flight to a Qantas connection. Can you shed any light on that?
Well, this was first revealed by the Prime Minister at his news conference, that same one of which we saw a snippet of just a moment ago. And the plane that he was talking about is American Airlines Flight 75 from Dulles Airport outside Washington to Los Angeles. That is the plane which is believed to have crashed into the Pentagon. Now, I'm told that there were a total of 6 people who bought Qantas tickets on that flight, plus one member of the Qantas staff who apparently was heading back to Australia. So at this stage, it appears that there may be up to 7 Australians who were killed in the air as this horrific tragedy unfolded.
Jim, have you been able to learn any more of the attack on the Pentagon?
Not a lot more. It occurred, ironically enough, just as the Prime Minister was holding a press conference this morning at about 9:30 Washington time on the Tampa crisis. Whispers came into the room, and then as we looked out the window there 5 kilometres away was the Pentagon with a plume of smoke emerging from it. Almost immediately after the press conference, the Prime Minister, who had been staying in the Willard Hotel here, which is about 3 blocks from the White House, was whisked away by the Secret Service to a secure area within the Australian Embassy, which is about 7 or 8 blocks from the hotel. And from there, he started to coordinate Australia's response to this crisis, talking to John Anderson and other members of his government about just exactly what was needed to be done back in Australia in particular. It also means, of course, Jane, that this is effectively the end of what was intended to be a 5-day trip here. He's already cancelled the New York leg of his visit, which was due to occur in 2 days' time. Of course, he was also due to address Congress tomorrow, local time, and in the circumstances it would seem highly unlikely that that is going to occur. Of more practical concern just at this moment is just how the Prime Minister is going to get back to Australia with all American flights grounded until at least midday tomorrow, Washington time, and concerns obviously about security in the air being paramount.
Jim, it seems that much of the US has now gone into a security lockdown. Would that be an accurate description?
It is indeed. When the bombing at the, or rather the incident, the plane crashing at the Pentagon occurred, there was immediately gridlock and chaos and a bit of panic in the streets. Now, Washington is effectively deserted. It's like a ghost town. As in New York, the mayor of Washington has declared a national emergency. You can't get in or out of the city. The bridges are closed. And it's interesting, I think, that also the president, who was in Florida when this crisis emerged, flew then to a secure Air Force base in Louisiana and has now moved on to Nebraska. It's interesting that he's not yet back at the White House, which would seem to indicate that the American security services are not entirely happy
with that the White House is a secure area for the President to be.
On that question of security, the country understandably is in a state of shock, but are questions going to be asked about how security could have been so badly breached?
They are indeed, and particularly with such a sophisticated operation as this. It's quite clear when you get an operation that involves more than one airport, also involves the knowledge on the part of the participants of getting planes which were going to have maximum fuel loads at the time that they impacted with their targets, and thirdly, that they were able to fly the planes as well, then this is a massive security breach. Nothing like this has been seen in the United States ever. In fact, it's the most serious attack on the United States since Pearl Harbor, which the Prime Minister alluded to. But also other questions are being asked too, Jane, and there are very few Americans who have any doubt at any level that this was an act carried out by the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden. There is immense scepticism on the part of Americans about the statements from the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which has been allowing him to live there, that he had nothing to do with it. It is being described universally as an act of war. That was the term that former Secretary of State George Shultz used, and also John McCain, who attempted to win the presidency under the Republican banner but was defeated by George W. Bush in the Republican primaries. An act of war. This means, I would think, that as soon as they've got any degree of certainty at all, you can expect retaliation with massive force from the United States. And just before this program was going to air, senior administration officials were confirming to the American networks that they believe that this was indeed the handiwork of Osama bin Laden. So this is a very precarious, very serious situation, and as soon as the Americans are in any way certain or able to mount retaliatory action, I think we can expect it in very, very serious form indeed.
The ABC's political correspondent in Washington, Jim Middleton, keeping us up to date there. And the Department of Foreign Affairs has set up a hotline for Australians concerned about relatives in New York. The number is 1300 555 135. Repeating that number again, 1300 555 135. The tragedy has attracted condolences and condemnation from around the world, but there has been some rejoicing in Palestinian communities.
The attacks brought universal outrage from leaders across the globe.
I'm afraid we can only imagine the terror and the carnage there, and the many, many innocent people that will have lost their lives.
From the US's most loyal ally, there was resignation that the world had entered a dangerous new phase.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together to fight it together and eradicate this evil completely from our world.
Fellow European leaders simply couldn't believe the early morning carnage in New York and Washington. President Chirac expressed France's solidarity with the United States, adding his country's voice to those condemning terrorism. In the Middle East, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat was quick to distance his cause from violence on American soil.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, completely shocked.
In the West Bank town of Nablus, some Palestinians reacted with joy, undermining Mr. Arafat's show of concern for a country which still holds the key to negotiating sustained peace in the troubled region. The Taliban leadership in Afghanistan was anxious to convey its sorrow at the loss of life, but will still face a tough task to convince skeptics it doesn't deal in terrorism. United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan has the difficult task of maintaining dialogue in a world where distrust is the common currency.
In such moments, cool and reasoned judgment are more essential than ever. We do not know yet who is behind these acts or what objective they hope to achieve. What we do know is that no just cause can be advanced by terror.
Leaders like Malaysia's President Mahathir are urging US restraint as the superpower looks to send a powerful message of retribution.
Once again, we see terrorism, we see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose.
Colin Powell, as Secretary of State and war hero, is certain to be at the core of a response from a shocked and angry United States of America. And the impact has spread around the world. NATO ministers are meeting in emergency session in Brussels. There is no plane traffic across the Atlantic and stock exchanges have shut down across Europe. Simon Santo, ABC News.
Our Middle East correspondent Tim Palmer joins us now. Tim, we've seen some celebration but also regret from the Palestinians. What's your reading of the situation?
Well, clearly governments and Palestinian factions in this region have been quick to condemn the attack and try and allay the kind of early suspicions that fell on some groups. The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine was initially named as having made a claim of responsibility. That group has immediately denied that suggestion, as has the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Groups such as Islamic Jihad and Hamas have also condemned the attack. At the same time, they've suggested that this is the clear result of American foreign policy, particularly in this region. And even countries that have a terrorist past as far as the United States is concerned, such as Iran and Syria, have matched the condemnation coming out of here. Most clearly that from Yasser Arafat, who looked quite shocked, as you saw before, in making his statement. Of course, much of what he said will be totally drowned out by the kind of actions that we saw on streets in Jerusalem and throughout the West Bank and in Lebanon of some Palestinian groups celebrating this attack.
What was the scale of those celebrations?
It seemed fairly isolated, although in Nablus it was suggested several thousand people took to the streets. It was later reported that Palestinian officials had moved in to tell people to simply go home and to break up those celebrations. Clearly the kind of signal that this will send out to Israelis and to Americans would suggest that American mediation in this area in terms of peace, the needed factor in an Israeli-Palestinian conflict that runs on below this, really will not be encouraged at all by this kind of scene of celebrating a mass death in an American city.
Tim, what's been the relationship between some of the extremist factions like Islamic Jihad and Osama bin Laden? What's been the relationship in the past?
These kinds of traces are very difficult to establish. The Americans have laboured to establish, for example, the previous World Trade Center bombing, in which they have convictions with Osama bin Laden. Similarly, it's been a difficult point to demonstrate the American embassies, although convictions were obtained there. In Africa, the bombings there. It must be remembered that around 20 months ago, another chain of attacks, the key signature of Osama bin Laden's attacks in the past, a synchronised series of attacks, was supposedly planned against tourist targets in Jordan and in the Holy Land to coincide with millennial tourism. So again, there are suggestions that there may be operatives in this region as well. And of course, all eyes are turning to the Middle East and more broadly to Islamic fundamentalists. At the same time, it's being tempered with a lot of discussion on Arab networks here. When the Oklahoma bombing occurred, for days, again, Arab and Islamic groups.
And we seem to have lost Tim Palmer from the Middle East, and we apologise for the scratchy sound. Soon after the 4 aircraft crashed, the United States closed its airspace, creating aviation havoc around the world. International airports in Australia are just gearing up for the day ahead, but it's likely there'll be severe disruptions. Simon Santo is at the Sydney International Terminal. Simon, what's the situation at the airport?
Jane, what I can tell you is that it's already having a direct effect on Australian passengers, Australian customers of not just the Australian airline Qantas, but also Air New Zealand and United Airlines. There are 3 flights due to leave for the United States within an hour and a half of each other from about 9:30 this morning out here at Sydney Airport. And we do know that officially that Air New Zealand, the first of those flights, and also Qantas, the second, have cancelled their flights. They have cancelled them with no plans to reinstate them as yet, so they're not even postponed. United Airlines, the third of those 3 flights, have yet to announce what their plans are, but one would assume that the outlook is bleak given that the airspace in the US still seems to be closed off.
And Simon, have many passengers arrived? Is there any sense of panic?
It's still a little early. Air New Zealand, when they spoke to me earlier today, said that they have some 150 passengers on their flight. It's not full, but that they are beginning the process of phoning passengers to let them know that in fact their flights won't take off today. What we have heard also, and we have had some confirmation, is that of the 4 fatal flights that occurred just some hours ago in the States, there have been some Qantas passengers on board 2 of those flights, the American Airlines flights, which are code-share partners with Qantas. We have no confirmation that there are any Australian citizens on board, but we do know that they were Qantas passengers. There were some 6 on one flight and 1 Qantas US-based staff member on another flight of those two of those 4 fatal flights.
The ABC's Simon Santo at Sydney Airport. As we mentioned earlier, with no one yet claiming responsibility for the deadly and brutal attacks, suspicion is being directed at Saudi dissident and well-known terrorist Osama bin Laden. But the Taliban have rejected suggestions he was involved in the plane attacks. The ABC's South Asia correspondent Jonathan Harley spoke to senior members of the Taliban government a short time ago, and he joins me now. Jonathan, what did the government officials say?
I was at the press conference speaking with Foreign Minister, no less, Wakil Ahmad Mutawakil, a senior member, of course, of the Taliban regime, and in no uncertain terms distancing the Taliban or Osama bin Laden, who is a guest of the regime, of any involvement. He condemned these attacks, describing them as vast and terrifying, and flatly rejecting any suggestion that Osama bin Laden has had any involvement, or by extension the Taliban. However, such assurances may well come as cold comfort to those who will point an accusing finger towards this part of the world.
That was very swift response from the Taliban. Why do you think that was?
Well, the regime has every reason to be nervous. The United States launched 70 cruise missiles on Afghanistan on suspected target bases of Osama bin Laden in September 1998 in the wake of the bombings of the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in the same month. In those bombing attacks, 220 people had died, and Osama bin Laden has ever since been accused by Washington as the mastermind behind those attacks, as well as the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, in which 7 people died. So the Taliban must know that they're high on the list of suspects for at least harboring alleged terrorist Osama bin Laden. Despite that, a remarkable act of optimism, I guess it's best described as. Wakil Ahmad Mutawakil says no precautions are being made by the Taliban, bracing for any prospect of strikes. That would be too early to act in that way. No state of emergency, so very much either in denial or maintaining at least an image of innocence.
The ABC's Jonathan Harley speaking to us there from Kabul. Security around US installations and offices in Australia has also been tightened overnight. Political editor Russell Barton joins us from Canberra. First of all, what has happened around the US Embassy, Russell?
Well, you're right, Jane. Security in Australia is on high alert. John Howard was on the phone to Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson here in Canberra soon after the attacks in New York and Washington, and at about 2:30 this morning, roads around the United States and the Israeli embassies were closed and children evacuated from the US embassy. As well, consulates in other cities have been similarly beefed up security-wise. Mr. Howard said as precautionary measures, security had also been tightened around other US assets and installations in this country, and ASIO had increased its surveillance of Israeli assets as well.
Russell, the Prime Minister is still in the United States. Obviously, his trip will be cut short, but what happens to his itinerary in terms of how actually will he be brought back to Australia?
Well, Mr. Howard told his Washington news conference that his program was on hold, and as Jim Middleton told us earlier, it was unlikely that he would complete his tour. That was to involve an address to Congress tomorrow, before he was then going to travel to New York to address business groups. That certainly won't happen now under those circumstances. And as for how he's getting home, well, that's not been decided yet. But obviously, with American airports closed, he won't be able to leave immediately, and it may well be that a VIP jet will have to be dispatched from Australia to pick him up within the next couple of days.
The ABC's political editor, Russell Barton, keeping us up to date from Canberra. Let's go back now to our earlier interview with the ABC's Prue Clark, who's in New York. She lives just a few blocks from the World Trade Center, and I spoke to her earlier.
I just heard on the radio that there'd been an incident. That was at about 10 to 9. I was on my way to work. I walked outside and looked at the building, which is about 15 blocks south of my house, and there was the gaping great hole, as you've seen. I couldn't believe it. People around me couldn't believe it. A lot of people were sort of walking towards the World Trade Center, which I did too. A lot of people were in shock and kind of screaming. They obviously knew people inside the building. But coming the other way were the evacuees, who were all in a terrible state. They were crying. And at that point, as I was walking down, it was perhaps 8 blocks of the second plane hit, and I only knew that because I was listening to the radio, and I didn't actually even hear it, which was extraordinary to me. And then just kept walking. There was sort of no police action at that point, not much control, and they let me come right up close, about a block away from the World Trade Center. There was debris and glass everywhere, all over the cars. Only a few police. And there were a few people standing there, and the police kind of moved us on, and I'm terribly glad they did, because we were, perhaps no more than 3 blocks north of the World Trade Center when the South building collapsed.
And can you tell me what that was like, Prue?
It was absolutely horrifying. There was a roar, and then the building just began to disappear as it sort of imploded, I think. And people were in shock. They were screaming and running up the street. There was a stampede. We really thought we were going to die on that street, I think. And this massive plume of debris and dirt rushed up the street towards us, and sort of overcame a lot of us. And then we were perhaps 8 blocks away, and when that all sort of subsided, and we turned around and just looked at the building, and that was when people started to realize that many people were jumping from the north building of the World Trade Center from the 85th floor. A lot of them were alight as they fell, but most of them were just jumping to escape the flames, I assume.
Prue, this event happened about 7 hours ago. Is there any indication yet of the death toll?
There's no indication whatsoever. The emergency services have just refused to answer that question. Rudy Giuliani, the mayor, has done the same. I mean, they appreciate they're talking thousands. They say that there are about 20,000 people in the building, probably at that point in time. But it was an hour between when the first plane hit and when the South building collapsed. So presumably a lot of people would have got out in that time, and I have heard stories, many people that I know actually who got out in that time. But I have heard as well that during the World Trade Center bombing, and remember these buildings are 110 stories high, the World Trade Center bombing, they started evacuating people at 10 o'clock, and they were still coming out at 6 o'clock that night. So a lot of people wouldn't have escaped, and the buildings surrounding that as well, I would think, when the 2 main buildings collapsed, would have taken a fair bit of force as well. And we're sort of being moved along at the moment. There's a a fire in a building next door to where the World Trade Center towers were, and a lot of people speculating that that one might be about to fall.
Prue,
but the most alarming thing, I think, is that we've seen hundreds of ambulances go in and very few ambulances come out at this point.
How are people on the street reacting?
Well, you know, at the time it was just total disbelief. We were standing there watching people coming out, jumping out of the building, and people were sighing and in shock and screaming and you know, terrified, and also people coming out of the subways because they were afraid that that was just the beginning and that subways might be the next point of attack. But it's now 7 hours, as you said, and people are sort of calming down. These are New Yorkers after all, and you know, while this is extraordinary, they do sort of take life in its stride, and I mean, just 10 blocks north of the disaster area, people are sitting in cafes and having lunch. I had heard too, as I'm walking around, a few sort of anti-Arab calls as well. I don't know if that's a reflection of a broader sentiment in the point.
That's where we'll leave our ABC coverage of the US terror attacks for the moment. We'll be back at 7 with more details. Shortly, we'll return you to coverage from the Cable News Network.